nurses and addressed the conference. Thursday, the nurses will join environmental and other groups for the Los Angeles Climate Action Convergence. That march and rally coincides with the United Nations Climate Summit underway in Paris. One of the critical issues facing nurses is staffing, the nurse-to-patient ratio. California has had a law in place since 2004 governing safe nurse-patient staffing ratios. There are 2 bills in Congress now to establish those safe ratios nationwide. For its Safe Patient Ratios campaign, National Nurses United produced a video featuring nurses speaking out on the critical staffing issue.
Before ratios were put into law, I had 10 patients by myself on night shift.
I had 10 plus patients.
I didn't have enough feet, enough hands to get the work done.
The patients are calling, and you just can't go to 7, 8 people at the same time.
I was so happy for ratios. It was a godsend.
When the ratios came, it was like, hallelujah, because then you were really able to give true patient care.
I went to this one floor and talked to those nurses. There was 2 nurses on a floor with over 25 to 30 patients. Patients screaming out in pain. And that's when I knew right then and there, in every state, we got to have ratios.
The 2,200 workers locked out of their jobs by ATI flat-rolled products this week lost their company health insurance. The United Steelworkers offered catastrophic health care coverage to the locked-out workers free of charge. ATI demanded a long list of concessions, 146 of them. Most of those demands stayed on the table until the workers were locked out by the company back in August. The demands included dramatic cuts to health care, reductions in job security, changes in scheduling, and more outsourced work to contractors. There has been only one bargaining session since that lockout. The steelworkers say the lockout is costing ATI millions of dollars. The union has filed unfair labor practices charges against ATI with the NLRB. The AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust is investing up to $30 million in union pension funds to renovate as many as 300 single-family homes in Detroit. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka says this is union workers using union pension money to rebuild homes for working families. He says it's a formula for rebuilding Detroit. Over the last 3 decades, the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust has invested more than $8 billion in more than 100,000 housing units nationwide. WIN is made possible in part through underwriting support from the United Steelworkers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
West side people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rise on. Oh, and this time is my time. All right, love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my town.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots to talk about as we look more into the Pennsylvania budget as the big Pennsylvania Society Gala in New York City comes marching ever so closer. Again, hearing 2 sets of stories from folks. Yes, it'll get done because all of the polls want to run to New York to raise their campaign cash and rub elbows and party and carry on and do all of that stuff. And then the other side of it saying, no, they're dug in. Not going to happen. Maybe Christmas. Probably next year, and no one's going. I find it difficult to believe no one's going. which will, and look, I got to be honest, I'm hoping at this point that it isn't a cave by the governor to go, we'll give everything away, the baby, the bath water, the towel, everything, just to get something done. That's the hope. I understand they're going to be working through the weekend, which ought to be very interesting to see. I don't know if that's happened before. We'll have to find that out. So we'll spend a little time on the budget. Also, the big meetings in Paris and Scottsdale, Arizona. The tale of two cities, if you will, on the climate change story. The folks in Paris saying, maybe we should think about doing, something. I don't know, a little bit of something that, maybe think about the day after tomorrow instead of just right now. And then the folks in Scottsdale, the Koch brothers and their ilk, saying, how do we undermine that whole thing in Paris? So we'll talk about that. Also, what we want in the budget for Christmas should be very interesting. And a tale of the holiday season. We're going to have someone come in and talk about their memoirs of crime, their memoirs of drug addiction, their memoirs of ruffianism, if you will, and also how they found their way out of it. I'm looking forward to talking to Michael McSorley about his book. We'll see. So lots of that. Also your thoughts, questions, comments. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Before we get into all of that, first thing that caught my attention today, cashless tolling places. This is what I've been worried about for some time. It's one of those things that probably 2 years ago I said is coming. It's here. Evidently, the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission has decided they're going to launch a couple of these cashless tolling places to where now you just blast right on through. So no more workers in those toll booths. You just go right on through. And what will happen is the camera will capture a picture of your license plate. They'll have a machine that will look up your license plate and it will issue you an invoice. So every time you go through the tolling booth, here comes a bill. What this is, understand, and I've been saying this for a long time, eventually they're going to get us all buying and holding the Easy Pass. Because right now, if you have an Easy Pass, it remains the way it is. This is what they're saying. You blast right on through, you'll be charged on your Easy Pass. But if you're one of those recalcitrant few people who say, I'm not getting an Easy Pass, I will pay the 35% more so that someone will have a job, well, you have been thwarted, my friends. Or if you're one of those people like me who really not thrilled with having the Easy Pass there because I don't necessarily know I want someone following me wherever I go. And I know that's a bit of paranoia, but we used to believe in this idea that this was a free country. You could move about freely. Not anymore. Evidently, your license plate will now be charged, and cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And this is the future, is it not? This will be the future of driving. You will no longer be allowed to go through the roads without going through a checkpoint and having your credit card automatically debited. Anybody else freaked out by this? Anybody concerned where this leads? Now, what they're saying is, well, it's not going to do away with all the toll takers yet. We're just trying. It's the trial phase. They plan on, rolling this out over the next year. We're going to see how it goes. Going to see how costly it's going to be. Going to see how much people react to it. Because I got to be honest, my reaction is negative. This idea that everywhere you go now, you have an ID number. Your license plate is now your ID. Whether you're parking on the street here in Harrisburg, where you have no choice but to put your license plate number into the little box so that they know you're there. And I know it sounds paranoid, and I know our Constitution doesn't absolutely give us the right to privacy, and because understand the word privacy, privy back then, it was kind of the bathroom, just put that's a whole nother discussion for another day. Anybody else freaked out by this idea that all of your movements will now be tracked and followed, and that there will be a record of everywhere you go? And I guess I'm just stuck in the old, the old days of, just leave me alone. This kind of stuff scares me. It's going to be a number of years, I believe. They're saying decades, perhaps, before the entire turnpike is converted to the easy plate or cash plate or whatever word they're using now. Toll plate, I believe, is the program that they're using to pick up your license plate and charge you. Now, this is the great part. They're going to still charge you the cash rate. So what this really is to make it as inconvenient as possible to drive on the turnpike so that you then move over quickly to the easy pass. Because now there's really no incentive to paying cash. There's now no incentive because there are going to be no workers there, and you're going to be charged the higher rate regardless, and it's all going to be automated. And hooray for them. Hooray for the big corporations. Now they're doing it just on this toll road. When does it come to all of the roads? When does it, the second you pull out of your driveway, a camera, something's taking a picture of your license plate and charging you? When does that happen? That's what I'm kind of wondering, because eventually, and understand, the goal is to charge you by the mile. There have been a couple of those proposals out there already that, you go, you get your inspection, they tally up how many miles you drove in the last year, and bang, invoice per mile charge. Because they're not going to raise the gas tax, just not, because you've got the Grover Norquist conservative saying, no, we cannot do that. That would be a tax and we can't do that. But if we invoice you for the miles that you drive, that somehow is different. I can't figure it out. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on the toll by plate program. I'm right now on the record against it 100%. Bad idea in my view. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. When we come back, I'll talk a little bit about the big budget and so much more. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1916. That was the day that 7 Australian members of the Industrial Workers of the World were sentenced to 15 years in prison for their anti-war efforts during World War I. Other IWW members were sentenced to as many as 5 and 10 years each. The IWW had led the way in protesting the use of the draft, or what was called conscription, during World War I. On August 10th, 1914, the front page of the Australian IWW newspaper, Direct Action, had declared war. For what? For the workers and their dependents, death, starvation, poverty, and untold misery. For the capitalist class, gold, stained with the blood of millions, riotous luxury, banquets of jubilation over the graves of their dupes and slaves. An Australian wobbly leader, Tom Barker, had urged, let those who own Australia do the fighting. Put the wealthiest in the front ranks. The middle class next. Follow these with politicians, lawyers, sky pilots, and judges. Answer the declaration of war with a call for a general strike. Barker was arrested and jailed more than once for his stance on the war. In 1916, Australians had grown increasingly weary of the fighting. They voted no in a referendum on the continued use of conscription. That September 1916, the government raided IWW offices and arrested key leaders. The leaders were sentenced to long prison terms. 9 months later, the IWW was outlawed in Australia. The membership rolls were made available to employers who blacklisted anyone on the lists. Continued involvement in the IWW could result in 6 months hard labor in the work camps. This government oppression took a sharp toll on the union. But to its credit, the IWW still exists in Australia to this day.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Eric Wustewald. On CNN, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani defended Donald Trump's comments that U.S. Muslims were celebrating in the wake of the 9/11 tragedy. Later that day, Giuliani doubled down on his false claims on Fox News' Your World with Neil Cavuto.
I will read to you from an article, September 14th, 2001, Fred Siegel, New York Post. This is back then. Okay. Here in New York, it was easy to get angry listening to Egyptians, Palestinians, and the Arabs of nearby Paterson, New Jersey, celebrate as they receive word of the murderous attacks in New York and Washington.
But on the Rachel Maddow show, MSNBC's Steve Kornacki reminisced with Maddow about a conversation he had with the reporter Giuliani cited as evidence. Here he is with Maddow.
The author of that column then has since said that he believes there might have been dozens celebrating in the greater New York area.
But he didn't see any of it. It was things that he had heard about.
Right. And he
wrote a column about rumors he heard at the time.
Exactly.
Others in the media have also debunked Trump's 9/11 claim, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, who called it, quote, another case of Trump's overactive imagination. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Standing tall against a multinational corporate agenda. The Rick Smith Show.
Stand for the things you want are real. You have you to complete, and there is no deal.
So this is interesting. It's being reported that the state Senate is going to be working the weekend. I don't know that that's ever happened before. Not in my recent memory. Maybe it has, and we've just not talked about it, or it's been magnified like it is now that we're more than 5 months over on actually doing your job. But it's been reported that they're going to work the entire weekend, possibly to get a budget done in time for Christmas. And I know the governor was on the radio this week talking about that they're working on some things, about 90% of the way there. There could be historic investments in education. There's going to be some liquor reform, whatever that means. He also said that they're going to broaden the base on the sales tax. Nothing on taxing the drillers, and no property tax relief either, according to what the governor had to say. I'll tell you, the rumors we're hearing, what's swirling around, kind of makes you wonder to talk a little bit more about what we know, what we don't know, and maybe what we'll see. We've asked our good friend, attorney Irwin Aronson, to come talk with us. Irwin, thanks for taking time for us.
Good to be here, Rick. How are you?
Good. So historic investments in education, the governor says.
Well, yeah, historic in the context of what we have seen in the last 4 years, because in order to refresh everybody's recollection, in his very first budget, Governor Wolf's predecessor, Governor Corbett, stripped $1 billion, that's billion with a B, roughly dollars a year out of each budget in education funding for each of the 4 years in which he was in the governor's office. So that's $4 billion worth of truly historic slashes, not cuts, true slashes in the state's responsibility providing an efficient and effective platform of public education here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So the proposed increase of $350 million in basic ed funding and another $50 million in funding for special ed is certainly historic in that it's an historic increase. But, excuse me, I'm so sorry, I'm fighting this cold. It's an historic increase, but it's after a literally earth-shaking period of decreases. So to put it in perspective, if I can offer up a perspective, before Corbett's first budget, one of the realities of the charter school law in Pennsylvania was that the Commonwealth was required as a matter of law to reimburse every school district in Philadelphia 70 cents out of every dollar that they were mandated by the charter school statute to pay to charter schools. Philadelphia school district, as only one example in the state, the Philadelphia school district spends about $700 million a year in charter school payments that are taken away from the school district operated schools, even though it doesn't take away from the cost of administering those school district operated schools, the buildings, the shoveling the snow, the heating the buildings, the providing electricity and gas and so on. So if I assume that $700 million roughly number a year, the reimbursement from the state should have been approximately $490 million a year. So the entire proposed historic statewide increase in education funding is only about statewide 2/3 of what the Philadelphia school district has lost in each of the last 4 years on charter school reimbursements alone.
Wow. But in looking at that, I mean, you understand we've got a Republican legislature that doesn't want to give him really anything from what I remember. So is this, a win for the governor? Is this a step forward? How do you view it then?
I see it as a governor who is faced with a practical political reality of a recalcitrant General Assembly and balancing that against the needs of our children, of our seniors, of our community service agencies, of our human service agencies, of the role of state government, of literally hundreds and hundreds of vendors who haven't been paid since the end of June of this year, who are doing business with the state, from the telephone company to the computer service companies to the electric and gas utilities to who knows what, consultants, suppliers, the people who sell the state pens and pencils and paper clips. So the governor who really outlined for all of us in Pennsylvania his vision for what Pennsylvania could and should be in his budget message in February, has been compelled to deal with this recalcitrance, not of all of the members of the General Assembly, because we don't know what all of the members of the General Assembly really want or want to fund, but with a leadership that has chosen what will be permitted to be considered. And one of the curiosities of all this, Rick, is that the Republican leadership of the House and Senate on two separate occasions compelled a vote on tax increases without telling us what that spending would be on if we got the tax increases, but never once have voted on funding things without the taxes. So we don't know what would happen if, for example, the governor's true proposal on funding education going back to February of this year were put to a vote, or March of this year, I'm sorry, were put to a vote in the General Assembly, because that has been refused.
Right.
Or the governor's proposal on funding special ed or human services or access to health care for children or property tax and rent rebate reform and relief for our senior citizens. None of that has ever been voted on. It has all been shot down by people who apparently fear what would happen if the General Assembly were actually given the opportunity to vote on those issues.
What's most outrageous to me, Irwin, is the fact that they're talking about raising the sales tax on, and I really believe harming low-wage workers, while the drilling companies continue to walk away unscathed.
Well, there is no question but that, and let me help with this. There's no talk of increasing the sales tax, that 6% sales tax, which is 7% in Pittsburgh and I think 8% in Philadelphia. There's no talk of increasing that. What there is a talk of expanding the base.
Right,
so
broadening the base, as the governor said.
More applicable to more things. And some of those things are legal services, not legal services purchased by businesses. So when your local utility company spends $1 million on legal fees to secure an increase in the electric or gas rates that you pay or the telephone rates that you pay, that would not be subject to the sales tax, but an expansion of the base so that legal fees imposed on people who are trying to secure their right to workers' compensation benefits or who are involved in adopting a child or who need to write a will, or who are fighting against an improper termination of their lease and a possible dispossession from their property or a utility shutoff, they would be required to pay sales tax on those legal fees. And expanding the applicability of the sales tax to other things, I've even heard such things, but I haven't seen this, so there's a caveat. Expanding the sales tax even to such things as funeral services. So, as the old Beatles song used to say, declare the pennies on your eyes. But in that context, a sales tax expansion, of course, is regressive because it hits people who have to buy things like washers and dryers and refrigerators and so on much harder when they're at the bottom of the economic ladder than it does at the top of those at the top of an economic ladder. At the same time, if we continue the exemption on clothing across the board, the person who buys a $4,000 handmade suit or a $1,500 pair of shoes would still not pay sales tax on that.
So are you advocating doing away with that part of the sales tax?
What I would advocate if somebody would do it would be to do away with it with a caveat, with a limitation, and that is that we keep the sales tax off of clothing, and particularly work clothing, for any article of clothing that costs, let's say, $500 or less, or $250 or less, so that working people who have to buy sneakers for the kids to go back to school wouldn't be hit with that sales tax. But at the same time, wealthy people who are big consumers and who consume big ticket items would be subject to the sales tax. The way they are now, by the way, in Pennsylvania for luxury items such as a fur coat, to the degree somebody still buys a fur coat, or other luxury items like expensive jewelry, to which the sales tax does apply. And,
so is there any talk of that?
Well, there's talk of it here now on the Rick Smith Show. so there is some talk of that, and there are some people who are suggesting that the language that exists in our state constitution about uniformity of taxation would prohibit any exemption or exclusion. But at the same time, we know that there is an extra 3% sales tax applied only to automobile leases. So that sales tax is 9%, not 6%. And we know that there's a luxury tax, for example, on furs. So it would seem to me that that luxury tax or that leasehold tax could be extended to other big ticket items that are purchased by people of significant means, and that would make such a tax much more progressive instead of an across-the-board sales tax expansion or increase that is very regressive.
It's an interesting thought, because at the end of the day, for me, I think the right way to go, and it's never going to happen, but would be to a more progressive income tax.
Yes, well,
the idea that the bigger your shoulders, the more you can carry, the more you should be expected to.
Well, historically, Pennsylvania's very first income tax was a progressive tax, and that was litigated, and our Supreme Court ultimately declared it to be unconstitutional because of the uniformity provision in the state constitution. So that is why we have a flat rate on our state income tax today. And while I may disagree with that decision, the Supreme Court is not final because it's infallible, but it is infallible because it is final. Right. So we have to accept that. And the only way that piece of the puzzle could change would be with a constitutional amendment that would again have to be passed in 2 successive sessions of the General Assembly. That doesn't seem likely, and then go to the people for a vote, as the people will this coming spring get a chance to vote on whether or not to amend the state constitution so that judicial officers would not be compelled to retire at the mandatory age of 70, but instead have that increased to 75. And that has passed 2 successive sessions of the General Assembly, and now will be on the ballot this coming spring.
Now, something to look forward to. So let me ask you a couple of other real quick things, because the governor also said something there would be some liquor reform Any ideas, anything that you're hearing on what that is? Is this Mike Terzai's privatization scheme? Is this the governor's idea of privatizing the management of the wholesales? What are you hearing?
We just don't know at this point. That has not been revealed to anybody, at least at my level. I'm sure that there are people who do know. I've been assured informally that it is not the Terzai proposal. I hear chit-chat about the possibility of wine and or beer sales in grocery stores. We have some limited beer sales in grocery stores now under a separate kind of kiosk affair within and under the roof of existing grocery stores that are properly licensed. So that's some talk of that. Whether or not the privatization, if you will, of the management of the system while retaining the system, the retail system and the employees in that retail system is on the table, I don't even know at this juncture. I do know that the current system is all but perfect in that it turns over $500 million every year or more to the state, which means our taxes are cut by that amount of money. And at the same time is the only retail business operating in the state that gives the state a fair shake on the sales tax and really collects 100 cents on the dollar of every dollar of the sales tax that are applicable. And it also serves a series of social purposes in that we don't ever hear of underage sales or service to minors, things of that nature in our current wine and spirit shop system. And we know that the price of a bottle of wine in Knox, Pennsylvania, and the price of that same bottle of wine in Philadelphia is exactly the same. And the variety that's available in Knox, Pennsylvania is exactly the same as it is in Bryn Mawr or Lower Merion or the North Hills area of Pittsburgh where Representative Terzai lives. So the bottle pick selection and price are all the same. And there's something really wonderful to be said about that on top of the system providing about 4,000 to 5,000 family-sustaining jobs with family-sustaining benefits. Why anybody would want to get rid of that is beyond my capacity to comprehend, quite frankly. I know beyond peradventure that if somebody were to come to a governor, any governor, this one, the last one, and say, Governor, I have a business that I want to start in Pennsylvania. It'll operate in every community in this state. It will have and assure that nobody will be more than 20, 25 miles away from the exact same selection at the exact same price anywhere in the state. It will assure that there are basically no robberies as there are in the Maryland and New York and other states that have been privatized shops. There will be no, Friday night and Saturday night hold-ups, stick-ups. There'll be no serving to underage, to minors, or sales. There will be some dimension of control and meet all of those kinds of things. Essentially, any governor that heard that story would respond by saying, Irwin, how much do you want from the state to start this business? And on top of that, not only is nobody asking any money to start this business, but they're turning over 100 cents on the dollar of every tax, sales tax, and even the emergency Johnstown flood tax from 1936 that's collected on every bottle of wines and spirits. But they're also turning over $500 million and more a year to the state's treasury as a profit. Every governor that would hear that would want to know how much the proposed business owner would want of state taxpayer money subsidy. And here we have that, and we're talking about giving it away.
It's incredible to me. So last question I've got for you. I keep saying that I just don't see how this doesn't get done by the Pennsylvania Society, given all of the parties, the money that's going to flow through there. Do you think it gets done by the 11th, or do you think this goes to Christmas or into the new year?
Well, if what I see today is any predictor, I don't think it gets done by the 11th, but I don't know. And I know that this important social event that was invented in the late 1800s by the captains of industry in Pennsylvania, the people who operated the Pennsylvania Railroad, the scions of Carnegie Steel, later U.S. Steel, and Jones and Laughlin Steel, and Wheeling Pittsburgh Steel and the Pugh family and the Sun Oil Trust and so on that started this little affair back in those days, so they would have an excuse to bring their families to New York to do their Christmas shopping, because here in the provinces there just wasn't enough stuff available. That has now morphed into this annual political event where the wine and whiskey flow, and the people of Pennsylvania don't get to see what happens at the Pennsylvania Society that takes place in New York, of all places. Is a big event on a whole lot of social calendars, Democratic and Republican alike, by the way. And I know that there is a whole political class and another class of the professional lobbyists and financiers and bankrollers and insurers and gas drillers and who knows what, that all want to get together and imbibe and socialize on somebody else's dime. I know that they all want to be there, but I just don't see the budget happening by the 11th. I know that the General Assembly is scheduled to work through this weekend and has session days scheduled for Saturday, for Sunday, and people are getting out the mattresses and bringing in their pajamas. But I, at the moment, don't see it happening. But who knows? Anything could happen, and there could be a break.
It'll be interesting to see it. I appreciate you giving us a little time, filling us in with your thoughts. Thanks so much.
Good to be here. Thank you. Hope to talk to you next week.
All righty. Our good friend, attorney Irwin Aronson. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream. This is a fading American dream.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
This is the day we stop denying there is an issue. And this is the day we do our part.
A carbon tax is coming for Alberta's dirty tar sands.
The viciousness of a handful of killers does not stop the world from doing vital business.
Obama says UN climate conference in Paris must go forward. Senate Republicans vow to monkey wrench international climate agreement. Plus, FDA approves first ever GMO salmon for human consumption.
You are what you eat. All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
2015, hottest year ever. Republicans claim thermometers just a theory.
That's just about where we are. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen. Well, we are going to be off for a few days for the holidays, but it sounds like you are sending us away with some very, very good and very big news.
Yes.
Out of Alberta, Canada.
Huge news. A major shift in environmental policy for Alberta, Canada, the home of the tar sands.
It is literally a game changer. It's a bold, bold step.
If I were the owner of a coal company, I would prefer that this announcement hadn't been made.
Alberta's new Premier, Rachel Notley, on Sunday announced that Alberta will launch a carbon tax beginning in 2017 and will put a cap on carbon emissions from its tar sands oil industry.
This is the day we start to mobilize capital and resources to create green jobs, green energy, green infrastructure, and a strong, environmentally responsible, sustainable, and visionary Alberta energy industry with a great future. This is the day we step up, at long last, to one of the world's biggest problems, the pollution that is causing climate change.
Possibly even more important, Alberta has set a target to phase out coal entirely within 15 years and has also set a target to cut methane emissions from natural gas production in half within 10 years. The carbon tax revenue will be invested in clean energy technology and on rebates for consumers to offset any projected higher energy costs.
What an amazing turn of events. just less than a month ago, we were still talking about the Keystone XL pipeline. Would it be approved or not? And here we are in Alberta, the home of the tar sands. Not only is there no longer a plan at the moment for the Keystone XL pipeline, but they're talking about phasing out the tar sands themselves with a carbon tax. Just amazing turn of events.
And it is intended to help Canada have a strong showing, as they call it, at the United Nations climate talks. Those begin in Paris on November 30th. That's when world leaders are going to meet for the final negotiations to create a comprehensive international agreement in which all countries will commit to cutting their greenhouse gas emissions that cause dangerous global warming. Massive planned public rallies and parades have now been banned in Paris due to security concerns in the wake of the Paris attacks. But the talks themselves must go on, President Obama said at a summit of Southeast Asian nations in Malaysia on Sunday.
It is absolutely vital for every country, every leader to send a signal that the viciousness of a handful of killers does not stop the world from doing vital business. And that Paris, one of the most beautiful, enticing cities in the world, is not going to be cowed by the violent, demented actions of a few. We do not succumb to fear.
Environmental groups are launching local marches and rallies around the world to help pressure world leaders to reach an ambitious agreement, since they are not allowed now to march in Paris. But regardless of what results out of Paris, Republicans in Congress have already vowed to block any agreement in any way and every way that they can.
Of course they have.
U.S. negotiators are pushing for the international agreement to not be called a treaty and to make it voluntary to avoid triggering Senate review.
Why don't they want to call it a treaty?
Well, if it's not a treaty, there's no requirement for the Senate to advise and consent.
Oh, tyranny.
The Republican majority in the Senate has promised to block billions in planned funding for poor countries that would help them build clean energy resources and prepare for the coming impacts of climate change.
But I thought they wanted to help the poor. I guess not. I guess they were just pretending.
Finally, the Food and Drug Administration has approved the first ever genetically modified animal for human consumption. The controversial salmon contains genes from other fish species that will help it grow 2 times faster than wild salmon. Promoters say that will reduce the amount of feed needed and would help reduce pressure on our overfished oceans. Critics, however, warn that the GMO salmon could still escape into the wild and impact wild salmon populations. The FDA will not require labeling for that GMO salmon product.
Frankenfish escaped into the wild. What could possibly go wrong? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
La mer qu'on voit danser le long des golfes clairs a des reflets d'argent, la mer.
There is no other agency like the EPA. It should really be renamed the Job-Killing Organization of America.
Because, brothers, it's a fact. If we take and don't put back, they'll have to pay for all we did. So let's leave some blue up above us.
I tell you, I really miss Michelle Bachmann. I miss the crazy. I do. I wish she was running for president. That would be that would add a little something extra to the insanity that we see on the Republican side. Anyway, welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So what we're seeing right now, almost a tale of two cities, if you will. You look at what's going on in Paris, 120 world leaders coming together, talk about how we deal with climate change. And then you go to the other side, like 6,000 miles away, Scottsdale, Arizona, where the wealth class and their corporate special interests are meeting to figure out how to undo what it is they're trying to do in Paris. And here to talk a little bit about it, I've asked Mary Bottari to come talk with us. She is the deputy director at the Center for Media and Democracy. Mary, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having us.
So you've got this kind of weird, we've chosen up sides, I guess, huh?
Well, there's 2 conferences taking place this week, and they're 5,438 miles apart, and their agendas couldn't be any more different, but they're directly related. Over in Paris, of course, 120 world leaders have gotten together to address in sort of an increasingly urgent fashion catastrophic climate change, which is already hitting, which everyone can see in their everyday lives, and is hitting some countries really hard and displacing people and causing incredibly costly events. Over in Arizona, in Scottsdale, Arizona, ALEC, our favorite corporate bill mill, which puts legislators and corporate lobbyists behind closed doors to write up model legislation to improve the lives of you and I, is meeting to discuss the climate conference. And they're continuing a multi-year effort to actually scuttle the Paris Accord.
Yeah, I was going to say, this isn't new. I mean, this new meeting, this isn't something that they've just come up with. They've been doing this for a while, right?
Yeah, in 2013, ALEC legislators called for guerrilla warfare against the EPA and new clean air rules that were going to be coming out in America. And, you know, curtailing the carbon pollution isn't like just some crazy international idea. It causes real health impacts in America. And it's very, very popular, both with Republicans and Democrats, to crack down on pollution. People want less of it. They want less asthma. They want less soot on their windshield, on their windowsills. And so over a number of years, the Obama administration has been working on really the most ambitious effort to curtail pollution from coal-fired power plants. And as soon as it was released, 24 attorney generals who had all been riled up by ALEC and other groups sued. And anyways, we wrote an article at prwatch.org explaining in detail ALEC's role with all this.
And that is to, attack the EPA, attack the this clean power plan that the Obama administration's come out with. Now, in looking at the clean power plan, though, I mean, which is, by American standards, very ambitious. They're talking about, I think, reducing carbon emissions or carbon dioxide emissions from power plants by 32% by 2030. Is that enough?
Well, that's a very good question. Experts say it's not enough. Experts say that we're really at an important tipping point because if we don't start addressing climate change now, all sorts of effects will start to spin out of control. So it is ambitious. I applaud the president for taking one of the more ambitious policy proposals that any president has done, but at the same time we have to realize that it's not enough, and that we're headed towards climate catastrophe if we don't take more aggressive action. Now, ALEC has fielded model bill after model bill that benefits directly their funders like the Koch Industries and ExxonMobil and big utility companies like Peabody. And they not only are like doing resolutions against the power plan and bills against the power plan, telling states that they can't implement the clean power plan unless they get specific state authorization, but they're attacking renewables, which is the funniest thing to me. It's just sort of like insane. Why would you try and tax solar energy to make it more expensive? Why would you try to roll back renewables? I mean, it's actually sort of a Neanderthal type position. I mean, they've got their heads so far in the tar sand they can't even see the climate that's all around them and how it's changing.
But at the end of this is this is their money, this is their profit, this is what goes into their pocket. I would think they're probably just like anyone cornered. They're fighting for their own survival.
That's true, but ALEC isn't supposed to be ExxonMobil. ALEC is supposed to be a group of legislators, and they are a group of legislators that are increasingly out of touch even with their own base. So they're supposed to be independent, conservative, ideological, blah, 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 Republicans. Well, let me tell you, Republicans in numbers sort of like 70 and 80% support renewable energy. The polling shows they want to accelerate renewable energy. The vast majority of Republicans right now, or I should say a solid majority, believes that world climate is changing and that mankind plays a role in it. But you don't hear any of this conversation at ALEC.
No, and what's interesting is, I've often used that word conservative. What are you conserving? If you look at this, nothing.
Nothing. So if you go to prwatch.org, we have a list of the energy companies that are in ALEC. We have their incredible track record of breaking federal law when it comes to environmental law, OSHA law, worker safety protections, those kinds of things. And we added up the total penalties for just the top 10 ALEC energy companies to $543 million.
Wow. And I got to wonder, if they were fined that much, how much did it cost us, the taxpayers? Because generally those fines never cost what it cost to clean up or what it cost to mitigate what they've done. So you got to wonder what that cost us as well.
No, that's right. And if you know anything about OSHA, you know that OSHA has very, very weak laws. And so someone dies, a guy is electrocuted, and they're fined, $7,000. This kind of thing happens all the time at OSHA. OSHA does not have multi-million-dollar fines. In the environmental area, you can get higher fines because you need to do cleanup and mitigation. But what's more important than actually going out there and killing workers? And that's what has happened in a number of these instances.
Yeah, it's rare that they ever go to jail. I've often quipped that if I ever wanted to kill someone, I would just hire them.
That's a good one.
Why not? I mean, you might get away with it. But here's the thing. I mean, I look at what's going on in Scottsdale, and I think the timing is interesting, that they're holding their meeting at the same time as the talks in Paris. How much of what we're seeing maybe coming out of Scottsdale and the messaging around this is just to weaken the president's position and make him look like no matter what he says, no matter what he does, nobody's going to be behind him on it?
That's right. The Attorney General's attack on the Clean Power Plan isn't about their constituencies and their state. It's about putting cement shoes on President Obama's Clean Power Plan and casting doubt on his ability globally to deliver on any climate commitments he might make in Paris. So I think it's a pretty sophisticated strategy for a group like ALEC. And unfortunately, they have too many willing attorney generals who just play along with this, including our own attorney general here in the state of Wisconsin, who's a guy named Brad Schimmel. And so, ALEC has a new model bill that's even more remarkable. They know that some taxpayers might be upset that their attorney generals are fighting on behalf of polluters and spending taxpayer dollars on it. So they have a new model bill to construct slush funds in each state so that fossil fuel interests can pour into them and help pay the attorney general's costs. I've never seen anything quite like it.
Is that even legal?
That's a good question.
I mean, because, the attorney
ethical.
generals, they're supposed to be.
Look at each state to see if it's even legal,
Yeah, I mean, it's my thought, and maybe you know it better than I do, but they're like the top cop. We pay them to be the head cop. They're having someone else pay their salary to do something. I've got serious problems with that.
No, I agree. And then, another funny thing that's happening at this ALEC meeting is at PR Watch, we figured out that Ford Motor Company was funding ALEC. And let me just tell you, that was a surprise to me. I love Fords. I love Fords as a consumer. I love Fords as a union member. And I was sort of shocked while all these other companies were dropping ALEC, Ford joined. And they're in a civil litigation committee. Well, here's a funny thing. In a different committee, the Energy Committee, they're going to try and pass a resolution getting rid of car subsidies and clean car subsidies, like electric car subsidies. And you sort of wonder, first of all, what is Ford doing behind closed doors with Coke, But secondly, do they know that the committee next door is going to pass a resolution to pull their electric car subsidies? Ford has been moving forward with electric cars, not backward.
That seems kind of weird that they would be in the same room where they would let them pull that while maintaining the subsidies that we give the fossil fuel industry.
Yep, nobody has a problem with $37 billion annually going out the door to Coke member companies like ExxonMobil, like Chevron, those kinds of companies.
Wow. So walk me through the last part of this. Where do you think this goes? What should we be watching for as these meetings break up? Because we don't know in Pennsylvania, where we're at, for instance, how many of our legislators are members of ALEC. I've asked a couple, and they don't give you answers. I'm curious. Where do you see this going afterward?
Well, every citizen that's interested in this topic should do an open records request, like their legislative parliamentarian, to try and figure out who the ALEC members are. So a couple things are going to come out of this. The people should pay attention to who are the attorney generals that are bringing these lawsuits against the Clean Power Plan, and they should contact them and tell them it is not in the public interest to be going forward with that. Secondly, ALEC will probably pass some model bills, those wonderful the cookie cutter bills that will come back to our states, like right to work and paycheck protection and all those kinds of awful things. We'll keep our eye out for them. You can follow the news at prwatch.org or hashtag AlecExposed. And if you are a tweeter, they're meeting in Scottsdale, Arizona today and tomorrow. They're using the hashtag AlecIdeas. You should drop them a line and tell them what you think of these awful ALEC ideas.
Disband.
There's an idea.
There's an idea. Mary, I appreciate you taking time for us and filling us in on this important stuff. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Great talking with you, Mary Bottari, Deputy Director over at the Center for Media and Democracy. They do fantastic work there. We've got a link to their website, prwatch.org, at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Mary's name. Quick break. Right back.
We're on the road to nowhere. We're on the road to nowhere. We're on the road to nowhere.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
The word free in free enterprise is not an adjective, it's a verb. As in, let's free up the enterprise of small business people who are locked out of the marketplace by monopoly power. From cable TV to chickens, market after market has been seized by a few corporations, enabling them to set prices, cut quality, and shrink service. We could cry in our beer about that, but even brewskis are falling to monopolists. The latest and biggest example is the proposed merger of Anheuser-Busch InBev with SAB Miller, creating a colossus that would control 1/3 of all beer sales in the world and a whopping 70% of all U.S. sales. Yet the resulting AB InBev behemoth asserts that there will be no antitrust problems because hundreds of small breweries are popping up like dandelions everywhere, creating a wide-open competition for customers. How free enterprise-y and fallacious. You see, to get customers, first you have to be able to get to them, i.e. be able to get your beers in the bars and on store shelves. That access is mostly controlled in the U.S. by beer wholesalers, and they decide which products they will and will not distribute. Now, guess which big honking beer maker has been aggressively buying up wholesale distributorships in recent years? Yes, AB InBev, giving it the power in various markets to lock out those pesky small breweries. No shelf space, no sales. No sales, no business. This is Jim Hightower saying Anheuser-Busch InBev gloats that it will be the, quote, first truly global brewery. But who cares? We quaffers of the brewer's art don't want one big beer, but many good ones. And this bully is becoming global only by rigging the market to shut down our good beers. To revolt against this monopolizer, contact California Craft Brewers Association at californiacraftbeer.com.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service.
We have just decided to invite Montenegro to begin accession talks to become the 29th member of our alliance.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg there announcing that the tiny nation of Montenegro is poised to become the latest country to join the alliance after Albania and Croatia in 2009. Don't expect Montenegro to be a major military asset, though. The country has less than 2,000 active duty personnel and a minuscule air force and navy. Instead, joining NATO is much more a matter of internal politics for a country formerly part of communist Yugoslavia. As other former members of the Soviet sphere joined NATO, Montenegro wanted the same, and the country's government spent years modernizing its armed forces and political institutions to meet NATO criteria. Earlier this year, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said NATO expansion to Montenegro was a provocation directed at Moscow. Stoltenberg was having none of that.
It is a fundamental principle that every nation has its sovereign right to decide its own path, including what kind of security arrangements it wants to be a part of. And no other country has any right to try to interfere in that decision-making process.
Next on the horizon for NATO expansion is Georgia, which fought and lost a brief war against Russia in 2008. Nevertheless, Stoltenberg said the alliance is working with Georgia on improving the rule of law and modernizing the country's armed forces. NATO leaders will next convene in July in Warsaw, where further expansion to Georgia is sure to be on the table. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. More than 1,000 RNs from across California and the nation gathered in Los Angeles Wednesday for a conference on critical issues facing nurses and safe patient care. California Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom welcomed the nurses and addressed the conference. Thursday, the nurses will join environmental and other groups for the Los Angeles Climate Action Convergence. That march and rally coincides with the United Nations Climate Summit underway in Paris. One of the critical issues facing nurses is staffing, the nurse-to-patient ratio. California has had a law in place since 2004 governing safe nurse-patient staffing ratios. There are 2 bills in Congress now to establish those safe ratios nationwide. For its Safe Patient Ratios campaign, National Nurses United produced a video featuring nurses speaking out on the critical staffing issue.
Before ratios were put into law, I had 10 patients by myself on night shift.
I had 10 plus patients. I didn't have enough feet, enough hands to get the work done. The patients are calling and you just can't go to 7, 8 people at the same time.
I was so happy for ratios. It was a godsend.
When the ratios came, it was like, hallelujah, because then you were really able to give true patient care.
I went to this one floor and talked to those nurses. There was 2 nurses on a floor with over 25 to 30 patients. Patients screaming out in pain. And that's when I knew right then and there, in every state, we got to have ratios.
The 2,200 workers locked out of their jobs by ATI flat-rolled products this week lost their company health insurance. The United Steelworkers offered catastrophic health care coverage to the locked-out workers free of charge. ATI demanded a long list of concessions, 146 of them. Most of those demands stayed on the table until the workers were locked out by the company back in August. The demands included dramatic cuts to health care, reductions in job security, changes in scheduling, and more outsourced work to contractors. There has been only one bargaining session since that lockout. The steelworkers say the lockout is costing ATI millions of dollars. The union has filed unfair labor practices charges against ATI with the NLRB. The AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust is investing up to $30 million in union pension funds to renovate as many as 300 single-family homes in Detroit. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka says this is union workers using union pension money to rebuild homes for working families. He says it's a formula for rebuilding Detroit. Over the last 3 decades, the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust has invested more than $8 billion in more than 100,000 housing units nationwide. WIN is made possible in part through underwriting support from the United Steelworkers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Rebuilding America. The Rick Smith Show.
The walls come tumbling down. The walls come crumbling, crumbling. The walls come tumbling, tumbling down.
Oh, we don't get a budget sometime soon here in the Commonwealth. They're going to be closing schools. They're going to be shutting down, shelters. They're going to be shutting down food banks. And you got to wonder, does that play on the minds of the governor and the Scorched Earth Caucus known as the General Assembly? And does it weigh equally? I got to be honest. I like the governor. I not so much of the leadership of the Republican Party, but I gotta wonder if that plays into the mind. And as we go forward the next couple of days, the big Pennsylvania Society dinner coming around the corner. I've been saying for a while, months now, that things are going to get done, and we find out that the Senate's going to be in session doing votes all weekend long. They're actually going to work the weekends. Wow, maybe that might get them to a little action. Maybe having to work the weekends, might get the misses a little upset or the misters, and cracking the whip and saying, "You get your," I don't know. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in the halls of our power structure. Which is why we've asked our good friend Abe Amoros, legislative director for LIUNA here in Pennsylvania, to come talk with us. Abe, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome, Rick. Thanks for having me.
So I guess our senators working the weekends, huh?
That's right. They didn't work yesterday, so they're going to try to make up for it this weekend, and we're waiting to see if the House is going to follow suit. I know that they have canceled several hearings on key pieces of legislation next week in the House, so they're making room, making time on that calendar, but nothing like the last minute, huh, Rick? I mean, here we are in December, just several weeks before the Christmas holiday, and still no budget in place.
You've been around this game long enough. How often, how rare is it, I guess should be the question, that our Senate actually works on a Saturday or Sunday?
It's extremely rare. In fact, the last time something like this happened was really, Rick, in 2002. That was Ed Rendell's first budget, which was late. And I remember being in the office till about 3 a.m. on December the 23rd, just waiting for phone calls to come in case any inquiries were made by the news media. But, this is as bad as it gets. I mean, this is ridiculous. And of course, I mean, we're only several weeks away, Rick, from the governor having to unveil his second budget,
right,
which they've been working on since November. So,
which is kind of funny if you think about it. It's kind of funny if you think about it, that you're working on your next budget proposal when this one isn't done yet.
That's exactly right.
I don't know how you write that.
Yeah, I don't either. I know that the staff is awfully taxed. I know that they're exhausted. I know that they're working around the clock. I can't really say that for the Senate Republican staff. I don't know what they're doing. And you posed a good question, Rick. I mean, when's the last time the Senate was around on a Saturday and Sunday, brother? I'm hard pressed to think of a time except for 2002, December of 2002, 13 years ago, when they were motivated to do this. And I mean, it's hit ridiculous proportions. And you were right at the top of your segment that they all want to go play in New York City for the Pennsylvania Society dinner. A lot of money has already been shelled out. Of course, they can't cancel and get any refunds, so they're trying to milk it as much as possible. And I know that they've got a lot of big money people whispering in their ears, "Hey, we got to get this done because a lot of people are counting on you for next week," meaning dollars and people who can write big fat checks, Rick.
Well, as my mother always said when I was a kid, and the same thing we say to our kids: you can't go play until your homework's done.
That's exactly right.
Doesn't get any simpler than that.
If only they went by that motto, I mean, things would be a lot better. But they're not. They're not doing anything. They're 1 minute they're talking about a framework. The next minute completely collapses on everybody. Then they say we're going back to the drawing board. And each side has said that they're making progress, Rick. But guess what? Nobody believes them.
Yeah.
Nobody believes them. And why should they? No, they're not making progress. We're still here talking about it.
Well, let me ask you this, because
getting done.
I've heard a number of stories that says the governor's given on a number of areas. He's given a little bit. He's given on pensions. He's given, I guess, on and this is just rumor at this point. We don't actually know, but I'm looking at the situation, and I'm looking at both parties, and I'm looking at the Republicans who, the longer this goes on, the more I think it plays into their hands and harms the governor, and I think they think that as well. But, the longer this goes, the more pain that is felt by people, the more they can point, say, government doesn't work. But, in looking at this, you've got this scorched earth mentality. Do you think that that's playing on the mind? Because the governor is giving. We're hearing reports of the governor giving on pensions and on liquor and on a bunch of things, while Republicans not. Could this be a situation where every time the governor gives a little bit more, they make an agreement and they say, whoa, he gave on that a little bit. Let's hold off longer and get more and more and more and more.
Absolutely, Rick. I mean, they know that they have him in a box. They know that he's exhausted a lot of his bargaining capacity here, and they know it. I mean, they have him in a precarious situation, and they still have the ability to cut deals. And he gives an inch, they take a foot, and they keep coming back. And the problem is the governor doesn't have a stopgap here. He doesn't have backup because he's dealing with two chambers that are in Republican control. So, I mean, they're taking advantage of the situation, no question about it. And of course, he has no backup. He has absolutely no backup. So the situation is becoming tense. I know that social service agencies are ready to storm the Capitol with pitchforks and you know, torches. It's becoming really sad. It really is. Because the ones that are most vulnerable, Rick, are the ones that are starting to really feel a lot of pain. And that's not what state government should be about. Yet the Republicans have the luxury of hiding behind posterity, hiding behind their empty talking points if they care about people, and they don't do anything. I mean, I was appalled when I read some of the remarks by the spokesperson from the Republican Party in Pennsylvania talking about how Governor Wolf is responsible for these domestic violence organizations not getting their money. Well, when it came time to give the money in the first place, they ran, they hid, they didn't do a darn thing about it. And now they're blaming the governor, and he's in a terrible position. And Rick, I mean, the guy, he's a decent guy fundamentally.
Yeah.
So he wants to do the right thing. And I know that his heart is bleeding, knowing that there's real pain out there, especially around the holiday season. He wants to fix it, but I'm hoping that he doesn't cave on everything, Rick. I mean, what you said was dead on. I mean, the pension situation, the liquor situation, we can't keep giving up, man. I mean, working people are already, we're already hurting as it is. We can't continue this.
Well, I mean, he signed recently, as you know, I was saying maybe this is an olive branch. He signed that bill that, you know, I guess now we're talking to your coworkers is going to could be considered stalking somewhere.
Yeah.
That was seen as an olive branch, but it was a huge victory for Republicans in nothing more than the messaging war. Because look, at the end of the day, you know, everything that the Republicans were saying that this bill would cure was already fixed by laws everywhere else. I mean, this was a political piece of legislation, and he caved on that.
He caved on it, Rick. But the saddest part of all this is not the fact that he hurt working people by doing that. Let's be clear. I'm not excusing him signing that bill by any means. But he didn't get anything in return either, Rick. And that's what they're going to keep doing. I mean, if you keep extending the olive branch, if you keep shaking hands, they're just going to take advantage of you because they outnumber Democrats. They know it. They could be the bullies on the block, and nobody can do anything about it. So he has to stop playing nice and not cave on another thing. Because if they continue to do this to him, it's going to be guaranteed that he's going to have a really hard time getting reelected in a few years.
Now you were part of the Rendell administration back when in 2003 when this happened.
Yes.
And it went, you know, what, 100 and some days?
Yes.
Do you see any parallels? Do you see any differences? What do you see that is different in this point? I mean, I look at it and I see just how far the Senate has gone and just how far the House has gone to the radical fringe, or were the same dynamics in place back then?
Well, back then you had one chamber that was controlled by the Democrats. The House was Democratic back then. And the Senate, of course, which has been in Republican hands forever, was still in Republican hands. But the difference that you saw here was that you had a governor who genuinely did not care what anyone thought about his stances, his politics. He was digging in and he was forcing them to blink. But he had that luxury of having a Democratic-controlled House just for a few years there. So that made his life a little easier in terms of bargaining. But he wasn't caving. He was not. I mean, when he said that he was going to do A, B, and C, he stuck to it and even tried to get D, E, and F, Rick. I mean, that's the kind of governor we had in Ed Rendell. And I think history is going to treat him a lot nicer in the next several years because of his ability to get things done in a hostile environment.
Right.
Because this is as hostile as it gets for any governor. It's brutal out there.
It's just crazy. I wanted to ask about another thing. I understand back, a couple of years back, Scott Perry led the charge to destroy unemployment compensation here in the Commonwealth. And I remember talking to him when he was in the House. Now he's in the U.S. House of Representatives, saying that unemployment, quote unquote, reform that he was pushing was going to hurt thousands of workers in the Commonwealth. It was going to really hurt your members, construction workers across the Commonwealth, which it has done. I understand that there's something in the works that may lessen the pain a little bit, not fix it the way it should be, but maybe just lessen it a little bit.
That's exactly right. We have been very encouraged by many discussions that have taken place over the last 2 weeks in terms of a piece of legislation that Democrats and Republicans can agree upon. And I know that Senator Tartaglione has taken a tremendous leadership role in that area. And we've also been talking to the House Majority Leader, Dave Reed, who is amenable to coming up with a solution. Those two have spoken to a lot of people across Pennsylvania, not just in their districts back home, and they realize that the pain is real. And I mean, we have had a good degree of success in terms of access to all four chairs of the Labor and Industry Committee in both chambers, which is very heartening. And I know that there's been legislation out there that has tried to address the problem. So on this, I think you're going to see some more bipartisanship. I think you're going to see some more sincere efforts because, you know, a lot of our members are starting to really, I mean, if we don't get this fixed, they're really going to start hurting you, Rick.
Right.
Because, I mean, the weather has held up and you still have a few people out there working out on our highways and bridges. But when it really starts to get cold and El Nino kicks in, I mean, January is going to be brutal. They won't be out there working. They're going to be out there collecting. And we need to make sure that they have a safety net, or else they're going to stop making their mortgage payments or car payments. Their kids are going to feel it at home. And that's not a position we want any of our members to be in.
Yeah, I'm with you. But real quick, explain how bad this has gotten. Because as I remember the change, the change that Scott Perry and the Republicans made back, I believe it was 2011.
Correct.
Was that if you had a mass of your earnings in one quarter and not so much in another quarter, it really kind of, it hurts you in being able to collect, and in the number of weeks they changed. The whole calculus was thrown askew deliberately, in my view, to affect seasonal workers like construction workers.
That's exactly right, Rick. And you know what they did? They hid behind the solvency of the unemployment compensation fund. It's written in legislation that it has to be at 250% in terms of solvency, which is absolute nonsense. The purpose of that legislation was to provide relief for men and women who were unemployed, who needed that as a safety net. It was not there to make a fund solvent. And the reason why that fund became insolvent in the first place is because the legislature decided not to set aside the necessary funding, just like they did with pensions, Rick. You know,
Right.
They keep kicking the can down the road, raiding the general fund, not paying their bills. And this is what happens. The consequences are real. You're looking at some serious pain unless they do something. And then they messed around with the percentage. At one point, it was 25%. You needed to make that much outside of your highest quarter, okay, in order to qualify. Well, the Corbyn administration went to some of our legislators and said, well, we want to raise that to 60 or 65%. And somebody flippantly said, well, no, you got to keep it under 50%. And this is why we have 49.5%, Rick. That's why it's at 49.5%, which is absolutely ludicrous. And there are pieces of legislation right now that are floating around in the Capitol that would lower that substantially. I don't know what that figure is going to be yet. And I know that there's some step-down provisions that are being tinkered with also. A lot of technical stuff, but the bottom line is I think we're going to have something in place to help our workers. And I know that the legislature is sincere in taking advantage of that, because, I mean, they're going to need a victory, Rick. They're going to need to show that they really care about individuals and working people and human beings after this debacle with the budget. And I think that this presents them with the very best opportunity to show some humanity in that place and help workers that are hurting.
It'll be interesting to see where that comes out, and I'm sure we'll have you back to talk about that as it pops up. Abe, I appreciate you taking time for us.
You got it, pal. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Our good friend Abe Amoros, Legislative Director here in Pennsylvania for LIUNA. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Come to talk.
I got no time for living, yes, I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1916. That was the day that 7 Australian members of the Industrial Workers of the World were sentenced to 15 years in prison for their anti-war efforts during World War I. Other IWW members were sentenced to as many as 5 and 10 years each. The IWW had led the way in protesting the use of the draft, or what was called conscription, during World War I. On August 10th, 1914, the front page of the Australian IWW newspaper, Direct Action, had declared war. For what? For the workers and their dependents? Death, starvation, poverty, and untold misery. For the capitalist class? Gold, stained with the blood of millions. Riotous luxury, banquets of jubilation over the graves of their dupes and slaves. An Australian wobbly leader, Tom Barker, had urged, "Let those who own Australia do the fighting. Put the wealthiest in the front ranks. The middle class next. Follow these with politicians, lawyers, sky pilots, and judges. Answer the declaration of war with a call for a general strike." Barker was arrested and jailed more than once for his stance on the war. In 1916, Australians had grown increasingly weary of the fighting. They voted no in a referendum on the continued use of conscription. That September 1916, the government raided IWW offices and arrested key leaders. The leaders were sentenced to long prison terms. 9 months later, the IWW was outlawed in Australia. The membership rolls were made available to employers who blacklisted anyone on the lists. Continued involvement in the IWW could result in 6 months hard labor in the work camps. This government oppression took a sharp toll on the union. But to its credit, the IWW still exists in Australia to this day.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been discussing the Cherokee Indians, their history, and their responses to the American colonists' domination over them. By the mid-1700s, the Cherokee were virtually subject to rule of the American colonists. Some attacked the colonists, some assimilated into colonial life, and others ran away. But the biggest group began a movement toward a centralized government. Their local town councils formed large regional councils. Eventually, these councils elected representatives to a national council and later transformed them into a constitutional republic. But Cherokee decrees of national sovereignty angered Southern expansionists in the 1820s, and they were overwhelmed by the American electorate in the 1830s. The Cherokee were eventually forced to move to Oklahoma in a trip so difficult that almost 1/4 of them died. This was the famous Trail of Tears in the winter of 1838-39. Join us again for today's Cherokee. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happy!
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists or bound?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check the website for ricksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, that's where you go to get at the podcast. Also, get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go, right there. iTunes, Google Play, look up The Rick Smith Show. It's free. And hey, give it to your friends and neighbors for the holidays as well. What better gift than the gift of knowledge? Welcome back to the program. You know, I go back to 2011, and I remember having now Congressman Scott Perry on the program a couple of times talking about this unemployment comp bill that they rammed through. And the most egregious part of it to me, honestly and truthfully, the most egregious part of it was that they had not increased the employer's contribution to the unemployment fund from like the early 90s. So it was underfunded to begin with. So when you had the big collapse in 2008 and we're losing as a nation nearly 1 million jobs a month, you end up having a bunch of unemployed folks going, hey, we need the money and we need it now. And the fund is paying out. And we haven't had enough money put into the fund over the years to sustain. So what they did is they ended up having to borrow money from the federal government to help cover the cost of unemployment and the extensions and all of that as well. So the fix they came up with is let's screw future unemployed workers by changing the calculation and eliminating a large number of those folks, especially in the construction industry where you've got the 2 quarters are going to be huge, and then you're going to have 2 quarters going to be really small. And they came up with that number specifically to exclude a number of people. And why? Well, so they could save money. And I love that. We're going to save the unemployment comp fund by screwing workers out of the fund that they paid into. Because understand, here in Pennsylvania, and I know it's not like this everywhere, but here in Pennsylvania, the workers pay into the unemployment fund. On every dollar that they earned, every dollar goes, they have to pay on. How the calculus used to work is you had to pay up to $8,000, a certain percentage, and that's what the employer's part of it was. Back in the 90s, when they figured this out, that was like almost half of the median income at the time. It had basically gone non-existent. So what they did in 2011 to change this, and you got to love this, they actually cut the rate even further. They gave businesses a tax cut at a time when they're gutting workers' unemployment and borrowing an enormous sum of money to float a bond to pay off the federal government because they didn't want to have to pay the penalties and the interest. I mean, this is GOP 101, man. I mean, this is fantastic. We get a tax cut, we get to make the system weaker, and the workers get the shaft again. What better way to do this than that? And now you look back after a number of years of people really feeling the pain and the screws being put to them. Finally, about time, you've got some of these legislators saying, oh, well, maybe we went too far. Do you think? At the end of this, what has to happen is they need to go back to the calculation they had before. Is that going to happen? No. But they should. Unemployment should be that safety net under our feet, that when catastrophe happens, like in 2008, that you don't lose your home. You don't end up not being able to feed your children or keeping clothes on their backs or health insurance or other things. I'll tell you, this scary stuff. But I'm glad to hear that there's something being done and maybe something to edge off the pain. And then a step from there. Just angering. And I remember 2011 having Scott Perry on the program saying, you're screwing people. And the sad part about it is the very people that he screwed elected him to go to Congress, where he's now part of the absolute crazy caucus, the Freedom Caucus. I'll tell you, just nuts. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Mark Steer, head guy over at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, about his 8 wishes for Christmas. It's not just the 2 front teeth. It's what he'd like to see in the budget. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
And the fly in the oil in the storm bring the whole thing down. Floodgates are open. We've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken, and we've fallen for the ruse.
There is this sort of unanimity of opinion that something has got to get done here.
Historic United Nations climate talks now underway in Paris.
Technology-driven advances are relentless. They're going to drive down costs, and they're basically going to make the cheapest thing to do the cleanest thing to do.
Governments and billionaires launch huge new investments in clean energy. Plus,
governments currently engaged in this round of climate talks will want to know that there is more than just an executive branch in our system of government.
Republicans working hard to undermine progress in any way they can.
All of that undermining and progress straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
Well, the world is in turmoil and falling apart in so many different ways, especially with ISIS. Our president is worried about global warming. What a ridiculous situation.
And no one knows ridiculous situations better than you, Mr. Trump. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's quite remarkable with so much going on in the news. It's easy to not even notice the fact that this historic climate change conference is now actually underway in Paris, as you have been waiting for and anticipating for so many months.
Oh, yeah, it's history being made in Paris right now at the Global Climate Talks. The nations of the world are now meeting in Paris for the 21st Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or COP21 for short. The goal is to complete a comprehensive international binding agreement for all nations to cut the greenhouse gas emissions that cause dangerous global warming in order to keep the planet's temperature from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial times.
Yeah, good luck with that.
I know. It's about 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Human activity has already raised temperatures by 1 degree Celsius. So, by the way, we are halfway there.
Just to clarify, halfway to the bad thing, not
Yes.
halfway to the good thing.
That's right. U.S. President Barack Obama opened the UN climate conference with an acknowledgement that developed countries like the U.S. bear responsibility to take action.
There is such a thing as being too late. And when it comes to climate change, that hour is almost upon us. I've come here personally as the leader of the world's largest economy and the second largest emitter to say that the United States of America not only recognizes our role in creating this problem, we embrace our responsibility to do something about it.
A successful global agreement includes transparent mechanisms for all countries to review their progress and ratchet up their targets as new technology becomes available. It includes measures to reduce deforestation and the biggest area of conflict, funding for developing nations so that they can prepare for climate change impacts and hopefully leapfrog over the pollution phase of development while still lifting their people out of poverty. And most importantly,
That it is an ambitious target that seeks a low carbon global economy over the course of this century.
in other words, phasing out fossil fuels completely. One thing the Paris conference will not do is solve climate change. National pledges to reduce emissions so far are not enough to stay below the key threshold of 2 degrees Celsius. So this is only the beginning. The talks create the architecture, the framework for the decades-long transition to a low-carbon and eventually zero-carbon economy. This is the first time all nations have agreed to do so. President Obama concluded his participation in Paris with a hopeful message.
I'm optimistic. I think we're going to solve it. I think the issue is just going to be the pace and how much damage is done before we are able to fully apply the brakes.
And so far, several major new financing programs have already been launched. The White House announced 2 sweeping initiatives. The U.S. and 20 developed nations will increase investment in clean energy research and development. A separate initiative headed by Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates will mobilize $20 billion in private venture capital investment. And India announced a new global solar energy partnership with 121 developing countries. But here in the U.S., congressional congressional Republicans still trying to undermine President Obama in Paris.
No.
This week passing 2 new resolutions to overturn Obama's landmark new emission standards for power plants, even though the White House will veto the legislation. They said it's to send a message to the world community that the U.S. might not abide by any agreement.
And to send a message that they don't like this planet really at all. They have no interest in keeping it livable, apparently.
Yet the Republicans are out of step with Americans. A new New York Times CBS poll this week finds 2/3 of Americans want the U.S. to sign on to the UN agreement.
For much more on the stories we covered today, including COP21, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
What the hell we fighting for? Just to run around and want it all. Just like time to say your prayers. While you're waiting for the hammer to fall.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So I've been saying for a while, maybe it's going to come down to Christmas time, and instead of our 2 front teeth, we're just going to be singing, all I want for Christmas is the budget to be passed, so that we're not closing down schools, we're not closing down food pantries, that social services aren't being harmed, that, well, we have a state in the holidays of chaos. I've seen our friends over at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. They've got a wish list as well. Not the 2 front teeth, but something just, I think, as helpful. And that's why I've asked Mark Steer. He is their brand new director over at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center to come talk with us. Mark, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks very much for inviting me. It's always be good to be on your show, and particularly in this new position for me.
I look at the wish list that you've got here and some pretty lofty goals. Actually increasing the minimum wage, say it isn't so.
Yeah, well, you know what? We have a budget problem in this state. If you increase the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour, you save $231.5 million in state Medicaid costs because you lift people above the eligibility level for Medicaid. That's a win-win.
Now, I just talked about this the other day. I want to see it raised at least enough that people's lives get better, that the workers' lives get better, that we're just not swapping off costs, that it's just not a situation like you said, we're going to save Medicaid money, we'll save LIHEAP money, we'll save school lunch program money, we'll save all that. But if the workers' lives aren't getting any better by having an increase enough to actually make their lives better, I'm almost at what's the point?
No, I think 10.10 and beyond that, with automatic indexing to inflation, will make people's lives better. They'll find health insurance through other programs that we've established in the last couple of years, programs that are paid for in other ways. So it helps the state budget. It helps working people.
Right.
There's no question minimum wage is one of the key things we need to help working people in this state.
What do you say to my right-wing friends who said, Mark, you're just a job killer?
I worked real hard the last time we raised the minimum wage.
I did
up to
too.
$7.15. I was part of the coalition that did it. And I remember those editorials coming from NFIB and other places said it's going to kill our jobs. Well, it didn't happen. We had more jobs the next year. I mean, you can say it all you want, but it empirically is not true.
And if it were true that the jobs will flee, one would think, given the fact that Pennsylvania has the lowest minimum wage of any of the states around us, that we should be stealing jobs from other states.
Right. Instead, as you know, we're pretty poor in job creation. We're down towards the bottom. And that just goes to show you that the high wage model of creating an economy does better for everyone than the low wage model.
Yeah.
You drive down people's wages, they don't have money to buy things. Hurts the economy, hurts job creation.
On some level, that makes common sense, and I think we've lost our minds when it comes to common sense. I think now we've been fed these talking points for so long, and they've filled our mind that somehow our what's between our ears been polluted.
Yeah, you know what? You just got to talk to people in small businesses who say, "Yeah, I want to pay my workers more than minimum wage because that means they stay longer." which means I don't have to retrain them, which means they get better at their job. Higher wages are more efficient, and the businesses that want to pay a higher wage sometimes can't because they're undercut by businesses that pay a lower wage.
Right.
If we raise the floor, we increase productivity for everyone. We increase wages, and that creates demand for products and services, and that creates more jobs.
So it's my thought, and maybe you can back this up or not, that because you used the word small business there.
Right.
And every small business owner that I've met, they don't pay the minimum wage.
Right.
They pay much higher than the minimum wage because they actually look those people in the face every day and want them to do better. And as you said, stay. So the minimum wage to me seems to be something that's being abused by these big behemoths, the fast food industry, who are multi-billion-dollar profitable. It just seems to me to be massive redistribution of wealth by having an artificially low minimum wage.
Yeah, that's true. It's the big places, the Walmarts, the McDonald's, that don't pay a decent wage. And, even for them, I think it may help them in the short term. But, sometimes we need to do things that help businesses think in their own long-term interest.
Right.
I think higher minimum wage is in everyone's interest.
That's a good one. There are a couple other things on your wish list, the 8-point wish list, that I think are very interesting. Maybe we have a severance tax on the drillers. In listening to the budget talks, it appears that the governor's even said it's not going to happen. And the Republicans said from the beginning, no way, in a cold day and where. I think there's got to be a push from the ground of grassroots saying, look, if we're expanding the sales tax on low-wage workers, come on. It doesn't make any sense not to go after the drillers.
Even on the Republican side, you had 18 Republicans who campaigned saying they supported a severance tax. I think if we could get a severance tax to the floor of the House and the Senate, we might find we have the votes to pass it. Because
a leadership
because
issue.
It simply just makes sense. The gas can't move. The shale rock is in Pennsylvania. If drillers want to drill it, they have to come here. They can't go drill for it in.
Can't do it from China.
And
I was told as a kid, if you dig deep enough, you got to China. Could we do the China plan?
No. You can't go to Connecticut. You can't go to Maine. You can't go to New Hampshire. It's in Pennsylvania. If they want to get it out of the ground, they have to come here. And the really funny thing is, to the extent that severance tax is passed on to consumers, and there's some issues about how much actually is. Most of it, I think, actually the drillers have to pay for, because there's this incredible natural resource that's very valuable, and they have to pay some of it because they're selling it to a global market. But to the extent it's passed on, lots of us in Pennsylvania already pay it because we get our natural gas from other states. If consumers are going to pay for a shale severance tax in Pennsylvania, it's going to be consumers in other states where we're selling our gas.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's always got me, because my wife has relatives who live in Alaska. And every year, she gets an email from them saying, I got my Alaska check. Right. Thank you for paying it for me so I can get it, because, they export all their oil out of the state, and everybody else is paying their tax.
Yeah. I lived in Alaska for 3 years. It was great to get that check. So do you
really keep a P.O. box there?
Right. No, you have really radical left-wing states like Alaska and Texas that tax their natural resources, and we in Pennsylvania don't. Now, come on.
That doesn't seem to make any sense to me. But again, it comes back down to who really controls what happens over there in the Capitol. These special interests are so powerful in this state. And because I haven't seen the kind of outrage that I would expect from the citizens having a budget 5 months late.
Yeah, it's disturbing to us that there hasn't been enough public outrage. And I think all of us on the progressive side need to be doing more to mobilize people, to get them to be talking to legislators and say, first of all, we need a budget, but it's not just that we need a budget. We need a budget that's oriented towards working people, towards the middle class in Pennsylvania. And that means the severance tax, the natural gas drillers have to pay their share. It means we need broad-based taxes that are paid for to a much higher degree by upper income people than lower income people. The sales tax, which it looks like we're not going to raise the rate, but we're going to broaden it.
Yeah.
And perhaps that will hide the pain a little bit. But the fact is, a sales tax is a sales tax. And a sales tax takes a much higher share of income from low-income people than upper-income people. I actually looked up the numbers in it before I walked over here. The sales tax in Pennsylvania takes about 5.8% of the income of the lowest 20% of families with income, and it takes about 2.3% of the top 20%, and only 0.6% of the income of the top 1%.
That seems upside down to me.
Right. It's what we call in the trade a regressive tax. It takes relatively more from lower income people than higher income people. And our first proposal in our 8-point wish list is a sales tax credit on your income tax. That's something you can do under the Pennsylvania Constitution. We have a personal income tax forgiveness credit. We could do it for the sales tax. That would offset the impact of broadening the sales tax. And maybe even go a little further and make the sales tax a little more progressive. That's something we think that legislators ought to be fighting for this year.
So instead of what I think is the right way to go about this is to have a very progressive income tax, which in our state constitution, not going to happen. And it's a long, arduous process to get there. That's never going to happen. You're saying maybe do this through the sales tax and then have much like the earned income tax credit to rebate some of that. That seems reasonable to me.
Rebate some of the sales tax based on your income level through the income tax. Now, we would prefer a personal income tax increase. Even a flat personal income tax increase in Pennsylvania is fairer, more equitable than a sales tax increase. But if we have to have a sales tax increase, let's make it more fair. And also, let's expand it, the base in the right way. Do you know that if you do laundry at home and you buy laundry detergent at the supermarket, you pay a sales tax on it.
Right.
If you wear a suit to work and you send your suit out to the dry cleaner, you don't pay a sales tax to the dry cleaner.
Okay, that I didn't know.
No, that's not fair.
My wife picks my stuff up.
Right. If you buy software to prepare your taxes, you have to pay sales tax on that software. If you have a lot of money and you need an accountant to prepare your tax returns, you don't pay sales tax to the accountant.
Interesting.
The sales tax is unfair not just because of who pays it, but because of what we tax and what we don't. So this opportunity to broaden the sales tax should be done in a way that makes it more fair, that taxes things that rich people buy as well as things that poor people buy.
Interesting. You think that's going to happen, though? I mean, are we going to? Because there's a lot of talk going on over there, and the special interests, now that they know that they're little special pieces on the plate, a lot of squealing and a lot of greasing of the pole.
Yeah, we really don't know what they're talking about. We don't know the details. But I'll tell you what people should look for. They're talking about putting a sales tax on recreation and amusement. Well, if they put a sales tax on bowling alleys, but not museums, then you ought to be wondering who's making those decisions up there and who's influencing them.
Let's take a look at a couple of other moments of your wish list. And you want to take a look at the wish list, we've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Mark Steer's name. Mark is the director of the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. You want to check out that website, penbpc.org, the website. We've got a link there at thericksmithshow.com. On the education front, which this governor ran on. He ran on two things, really. Going to fund education, going to tax the drillers. Not taxing the drillers. On the funding part, is there any talk of a fair funding formula that we're going to maybe go into some of the areas that are struggling? I look at the York City School District. I look at the Chester Upland District, and these are districts that are just starving and being beaten senselessly with these charter schools.
Right. We know that we progressives have won something. We've gotten funding for education that we didn't have before. I think they're talking 350 to 400 million. We don't know how it's going to be distributed. And that's a real concern because it's really important that they have a fair funding formula that restores funding to the low income, high poverty districts that bore a lot of the cuts during the Corbett years. So, we don't know. We're hopeful.
I'm told the Senate's going to work over the weekend. This may be all wrapped up by Monday after a weekend of having to work.
Well, they have somewhere to go at the end of next week, so they want to get it done.
That's been my prediction for months.
They want to go to New York.
They want the booze flowing and the checks filling their pockets. I get that, but at the end of the day, like my mother always said, you want to go out and play, you got to do your homework.
Right.
They haven't been doing their homework, and this is what's been frustrating me. We went a whole summer with, like I saw pictures of people floating in the Dead Sea. I'm going, why aren't you back here working?
Yeah, I mean, they're in a tough situation. There are real divisions between the parties, and what we'd like to see at PBPC is for people to be putting aside ideology and looking at the problems we have in Pennsylvania and finding a way to create a budget and create a tax system that's fair for working people.
So last bit I wanted to get to, because, if you remember back at the beginning of this year, and I do, you had the Senate leadership saying that nothing was going to get done until they got their priorities, much like my 2-year-old kicking and screaming on the ground, not me. They wanted liquor, they wanted pensions.
Right.
On your list, you're talking about, fair pensions for public sector workers. To me, that doesn't seem unreasonable. What I'm seeing coming out of the Republicans is they want to move from a very defined benefit plan over to one of these crummy 401k plans that I think the rest of us realize there's no retirement in that. It's just a bad savings plan.
Yeah, this is not one of my areas of expertise, and I'm on my first week in the job, so I'm going to have to learn more about it. But I do know my colleague at the Keystone Research Center, Steve Herzenberg, has done a lot of work on this, and he doesn't think that the plan that they're going to come up with is going to be really fair to workers. It's a modified hybrid plan that includes partly defined benefit, partly defined contribution, but the impact is likely to be that public workers are going to get much worse pensions than people who are already in the system, and that's not right. It's not a way to get good teachers and good state administrators and good state workers in other areas.
And at the end of the day, it's like any of this stuff. You make it so complicated that only the lawyers in Philadelphia can figure it out. I don't think it's a great deal.
Let's not start picking on Philadelphia.
I threw that out there knowing that that is your home, and I welcome you to the Harrisburg area for the couple of days that you're here, and I wish you nothing but the best of luck over there at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center.
Thanks very much.
Great to have you here. Thanks so much, Mark Steer, director there. Again, if you want to take a look at the 8 plans, the wishes for the final budget, just go to thericksmithshow.com, click on Mark Steer's name, take you right there. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around to listen to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Working class heroes, they are the ones who helped to build this land. Working class heroes, they stay united, always hand in hand. Working class heroes, with hearts of gold, that always shine so bright.
The word free in free enterprise is not an adjective, it's a verb. As in, let's free up the enterprise of small business people who are locked out of the marketplace by monopoly power. From cable TV to chickens, market after market has been seized by a few corporations, enabling them to set prices, cut quality, and shrink service. We could cry in our beer about that, but even brewskis are falling to monopolists. The latest and biggest example is the proposed merger of Anheuser-Busch InBev with SAB Miller, creating a colossus that would control 1/3 of all beer sales in the world and a whopping 70% of all U.S. sales. Yet the resulting AB InBev behemoth asserts that there will be no antitrust problems because hundreds of small breweries are popping up like dandelions everywhere, creating a wide-open competition for customers. How free enterprise-y and fallacious. You see, to get customers, first you have to be able to get to them, i.e. be able to get your beers in the bars and on store shelves. That access is mostly controlled in the U.S. by beer wholesalers, and they decide which products they will and will not distribute. Now, guess which big honking beer maker has been aggressively buying up wholesale distributorships in recent years? Yes, AB InBev, giving it the power in various markets to lock out those pesky small breweries. No shelf space, no sales. No sales, no business. This is Jim Hightower saying Anheuser-Busch InBev gloats that it will be the, quote, first truly global brewery. But who cares? We quaffers of the brewer's art don't want one big beer, but many good ones. And this bully is becoming global only by rigging the market to shut down our good beers. To revolt against this monopolizer, contact California Craft Brewers Association at californiacraftbeer.com.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service.
We have just decided to invite Montenegro to begin accession talks to become the 29th member of our alliance.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg there announcing that the tiny nation of Montenegro is poised to become the latest country to join the alliance after Albania and Croatia in 2009. Don't expect Montenegro to be a major military asset, though. The country has less than 2,000 active duty personnel and a minuscule air force and navy. Instead, joining NATO is much more a matter of internal politics for a country formerly part of communist Yugoslavia. As other former members of the Soviet sphere joined NATO, Montenegro wanted the same, and the country's government spent years modernizing its armed forces and political institutions to meet NATO criteria. Earlier this year, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said NATO expansion to Montenegro was a provocation directed at Moscow. Stoltenberg was having none of that.
It is a fundamental principle that every nation has its sovereign right to decide its own path, including what kind of security arrangements it wants to be a part of. And no other country has any right to try to interfere in that decision-making process.
Next on the horizon for NATO expansion is Georgia, which fought and lost a brief war against Russia in 2008. Nevertheless, Stoltenberg said the alliance is working with Georgia on improving the rule of law and modernizing the country's armed forces. NATO leaders will next convene in July in Warsaw, where further expansion to Georgia is sure to be on the table. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united, for undivided, we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call our brothers and our sisters. And are you and I are win. You and I both know that we can rely on it.
So the Institute for Policy Studies, they've just come out with their billionaire bonanza, the Forbes 400 and the rest of us. It's really kind of an interesting report that takes a look at, gives you some numbers, some stark comparisons. For instance, they point out that a luxury jet versus half the continent. That's the first battle royale. They say the 20 wealthiest Americans, people you could fit comfortably in one of those Gulfstream G650 jets that Creflo Dollar wanted. Remember that? Wanted his parishioners to give about $60 million for a little plane so he could go around the place. Evidently, those 20 people on the big list, they have a combined wealth of more than the bottom half of the population of this country. 152 million people. And you got to go, wait a second, how is that possible? It's possible because we've given so many tax breaks and so many handouts and so many subsidies, and the wages have been stagnant in this country for so long. They also point out that there's an unbelievable racial wealth gap as well, that the Forbes 400, those lucky 400 folks that you could probably fit in a good-sized room, they now have as much wealth as the entire African American community and a third of the Latino population combined. So it's not just all of the African American community or a third, it's all of them. You look at the big 400 versus, almost 195 million of us. Those 400 have a combined wealth of 2.34 trillion with a T dollars. And that's more wealth than the bottom 61% of the country combined. 154 million people. And you go, well, what exactly are you talking about? How did we get here? And for me, how we got here begins back John F. Kennedy. Kennedy was the guy who dropped that top marginal tax rate down from 92% down to 70. Then you fast forward to Ronald Reagan in 1980, who drops it down to 50, and then all the way down to 28. So you got the billionaire class paying 28% of the tax, 28% tax on their money. What do you think they did with that? Because what we were told is, well, they're smart people. They know what to do with the money. They're going to create jobs. Well, let me ask you, did they? Or did they do what I think everybody at the time was saying, or anybody who was thoughtful on this at the time was saying, is that they're just going to hoard it? Well, what do you think? At the end of the day, we need to have some rational tax codes. We need to have some rational thought, especially here in Pennsylvania as we look at this budget. It is what it is. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you're going to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, you can give it away at the holidays for free. Just go to Google Play or the iTunes store. Look for the Rick Smith Show. Quick break, right back. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. More than 1,000 RNs from across California and the nation gathered in Los Angeles Wednesday for a conference on critical issues facing nurses and safe patient care. California Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom welcomed the nurses and addressed the conference. Thursday, the nurses will join environmental and other groups for the Los Angeles Climate Action Convergence. That march and rally coincides with the United Nations Climate Summit underway in Paris. One of the critical issues facing nurses is staffing, the nurse-to-patient ratio. California has had a law in place since 2004 governing safe nurse-patient staffing ratios. There are 2 bills in Congress now to establish those safe ratios nationwide. For its Safe Patient Ratios campaign, National Nurses United produced a video featuring nurses speaking out on the critical staffing issue.
Before ratios were put into law, I had 10 patients by myself on night shift.
I had 10 plus patients. I didn't have enough feet, enough hands to get the work done. The patients are calling and you just can't go to 7, 8 people at the same time.
I was so happy for ratios. It was a godsend.
When the ratios came, it was like, hallelujah, because then you were really able to give true patient care.
I went to this one floor and talked to those nurses. There was 2 nurses on a floor with over 25 to 30 patients. Patients screaming out in pain. And that's when I knew right then and there, in every state, we got to have ratios.
The 2,200 workers locked out of their jobs by ATI flat-rolled products this week lost their company health insurance. The United Steelworkers offered catastrophic health care coverage to the locked-out workers free of charge. ATI demanded a long list of concessions, 146 of them. Most of those demands stayed on the table until the workers were locked out by the company back in August. The demands included dramatic cuts to health care, reductions in job security, changes in scheduling, and more outsourced work to contractors. There has been only one bargaining session since that lockout. The steelworkers say the lockout is costing ATI millions of dollars. The union has filed unfair labor practices charges against ATI with the NLRB. The AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust is investing up to $30 million in union pension funds to renovate as many as 300 single-family homes in Detroit. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka says this is union workers using union pension money to rebuild homes for working families. He says it's a formula for rebuilding Detroit. Over the last 3 decades, the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust has invested more than $8 billion in more than 100,000 housing units nationwide. WIN is made possible in part through underwriting support from the United Steelworkers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. I got an interesting book the other day that, is one of those, I grew up at a time, in a really crummy environment where you saw gangs and drugs and crime and all kinds of stuff that, to be honest, a lot of my friends made poor choices. I made my share of them as well. But you wonder how you end up going down certain paths and if you'll ever get back on the straight and narrow. And I came across this book by Michael McSorley. The book is We'll See, a story about how he has turned his life around. A life of addiction, a life of crime, of desperation, and now on the straight and narrow. And then actually reaching out and helping other folks. So I've got Michael on the line. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So,
thanks for having me on.
So you look at this, and I got to be honest, as I've been looking through the book and reading about it, I'm going, wow, why would you say these things? This is kind of a bearing of the soul.
Yeah. Yeah, it's my memoirs over 30 years. I was born in the 50s. And I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And, my father was a labor historian. He was a business agent organizer for Local 53 Metal Lathers out of Philadelphia. And throughout my life, I grew up, I got caught up in drugs and alcohol, hanging on the corner. And I ended up in the juvenile detention centers of Pennsylvania. And, I got caught up in some crime, and I ended up in the county prison, went to a couple penitentiaries, Greatersford and Rockview. And within this story, Rick, my father tried to instill the history of organized labor that lay within my family. And I just couldn't get it at the time. And, eventually I found peace with my father later on in life. And he passed on the history of our family members going back to the 1880s with Samuel Gompers. And the story was, the Davis-Bacon Act, National Labor Relation Act. Also, it talks about George Meany and Johnny Lewis. And, it's a rich, what the reason why I wrote this within the book about addiction and crime was to, there's no longer in our school system being taught about organized labor.
Right.
And, the theme of the book is about a kid who lost his spirit at the age of 14. He lost his soul, and he poured alcohol and drugs into it. And, it's the chronicle of my life. It's taken me 30 years to write it. And I just want to inspire people today with all the death. And as you said, you're familiar growing up in that gritty area of America. And I just chronicled to I wrote it at 8th grade level. There's no curse words in it. And, I just wanted to write a book to the average man to let know if you quit a life of drugs, alcohol, and crime. See, my friends growing up, they all joined gangs and clubs. Well, after I got out of penitentiary in '83, I joined a union, and I turned my life around. I served an apprenticeship at a local 19 sheet metal workers out there in Philly. And, I learned how to sketch, and I learned how to estimate, and I opened my business in '92, and I became a productive member of society.
And at the end of that, Michael, this is what I talk about quite often here on the program. I grew up in, like you said, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, and we did our things, but it was that union card that helped move me out of poverty and into a life where my kids will never see the insanity, the violence, the hunger, all of those things that I grew up with. And it's because of the work that I did and the fact that there was a contract there, and which is why I thought this book was so important, because of that focus on the job and on that participation in a labor union.
Yeah, well, actually, what happened was, when I got out of penitentiary, actually, my family was on welfare. We were living in squalor, and because of the apprenticeship program, I could rise above that. It was a struggle. There's nothing easy about life, and I actually document, how I got out, how I got involved in the labor movement, and where in America can a two-time loser, recovering alcoholic and drug addict, can get a second, third, and fourth chance at life. It's only I believe in the labor movement, in the building trades that I got involved in, that you get that chance, because today with, background checks and, any black mark on your past, you can't go nowhere in life. Right. And the labor, the building trades gave me that shot.
Yeah, and you had a bunch of those black marks. I mean, when you're talking about, being incarcerated, you're talking about your battles with addiction. Those are a number of those checks on boxes that people would automatically, in this day and age, shun you off to the side.
Exactly. And actually, I was thrown. In fact, Rick, I I ran two corporations, two mechanical firms out of Philly, and actually in 2009, when everything fell apart, I lost my business, and I searched for a job until I got back into the union, because I was on the out of work list, and I was denied. And as I said, I ran two corporations. Here I am trying to feed my family again, because the recession. It was a depression. We're coming out of a hellhole here. And, I just wanted to, so it gave me some time. I retired about a year ago, and it gave me some time to finish this book up. And I wrote it to inspire young kids in this country that it's honorable to work with your hands and your back and your brains. And it's good to, like, where in this country can you go to a college for 4 years, get out of college with no college debt, and make $80,000-$90,000 a year? It's a dream. And I just wanted to write to inspire, young kids in this country that it's okay. It's good. I mean, this is a chance of a lifetime.
Right.
And plus the key of it is that I chronicle how my family is restored. Finally I found peace after a life of chaos. I threw my demons into the light so they would perish. And, I wanted to chronicle that. And, finally, after 30 years, it's kind of a joy of accomplishment. But the really cool thing about it is there was a struggle between me and my father. And we finally found peace together over a South Philly diner, crying over with each other. And, we made amends to each other. We found peace. And I finally got to write about the sit-downs I had with my father and how my family goes back to the 1880s with Samuel Gompers and the Molly Maguires and the Knights of Labor. Which all was, the original concept in this country. That's where the labor movement really, when Samuel Gompers put all the building trades together to start the American Federation of Labor. And my family goes back to the conception of the Department of Labor. And, I wrote that down to inspire young kids. And, there's a lot of people incarcerated in this country today and with addiction problems. And so I kind of intermingled all them social issues, the labor movement, and, my life with addiction and crime. And it ain't like a crime book where I'm snitching on my past partners. There's no names in there. It's just my journey as a young man written through an old man's eyes.
Just trying to find, how you found your way, and maybe make a roadmap for somebody else who is now traveling in the paths that you were on.
And exactly. It's pretty much a schematic or a blueprint of my life. And it actually shows the struggles, the walking through the fire, trying to get clean and sober, and the effects on family and society, and wives and children, and how we were fractured and how we were restored. And I have 5 daughters, and they're doing great today. I mean,
good for them.
Our family's doing really good.
Good for you.
I just, as I said, Rick, I wrote this, and I was blessed with a radio show in Philly, and and a lot of people were like, love this because of the fact that they're struggling. A lot of people in this country today are struggling with the heroin addiction. And I was a recovering heroin addict, and I wrote about that, and I just want to let families know it's okay. You can be restored. You can live in hell and return whole.
And I highly suggest people take a look at the book. We'll see.org, the website. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Michael McSorley's name, take you right there. But the other part of this, and, especially in Philadelphia right now, you're talking about, an area of mass inequality. You've got, obscene wealth compared with abject poverty. You look at your school system is just struggling beyond compare. And, to me, this is kind of one of those stories of hope that, you may be living in a desperate situation. There may be some desperation and depression there, but there is hope and opportunity and a good job. That's where things should be starting. And I think with that opportunity of having that job, having that path forward, I think that says a lot and has a lot to do with moving forward. What do you think?
Well, here's the deal. What upsets me about what's going on in this country today, we spend more money to incarcerate a young man or woman than we do to spend to educate our young children today. And I want to inspire people today as like I was a hopeless heroin addict living in a cardboard box in the Badlands of North Philly. And I got an opportunity to get into the labor movement through an apprenticeship, and I was educated. And the inspiring thing is I became a businessman. I got to give back to society. I stimulated the economy by hiring men and women, and they paying them $44 an hour. They put back $44 an hour into the local and national economy. They pay taxes, and it gives a blueprint of how my union membership, and also it blueprints how to become a contractor. When I came from nothing, I mean, the banks wouldn't touch me. I used my street smarts to build a legitimate business. And it shows the struggles how I got there. And, not only how I reaped the rewards of my union membership, but how other people reaped the rewards that I hired. And, it helped families. They bought cars, they got mortgages, they bought computers, appliances, they stimulated the economy. And, I just want to inspire young kids in this country today that are joining gangs or clubs to join a union and put all that negative energy into something positive. You can achieve great things in this country. I say this to people all the time, which I felt all my life I was a victim. Stop being a victim. Pick up your hands, work hard with your back and brains and hands, and serve America. You give back and it gives you everything. America is the greatest country in the world. Where can a two-time loser, two-time convict, a recovering heroin and alcoholic can inspire other young men and women in this country today?
No, I'm with you. Let me ask you this, Michael, though, but going back to being that 14-year-old kid, do you think there would have been anything that could have taken you off of that track that would have maybe not let you head that way? What do you think? Is there anything for that kid today, that 14-year-old on the streets of Philadelphia, not to follow your path? What do you say?
Well, what I say is reach out to the building trades in Philadelphia. We have pre-apprentice programs. We have an immense amount of wisdom and experience in trying to teach kids. Reach out to your local unions that you're interested in and ask them, how can I get involved? How can I get educated? How can I get into the apprentice program? Here's the deal. What I put in this book, Greg, is the transformation of America from the 70s, where we have came from the 70s, where you had minority oppression, women oppression, and all that oppression we had, and the building trades opened their arms to allow anybody to come in here. After 100 years of us owning from grandfather to father to son, we finally broke that door open and allow anybody to come in. Anybody can come into the building trades as long as you have a high school diploma and you're willing to work hard with your hands and become a productive member of society. And as a 14-year-old boy, I was lost. My spirit was broken. And I'm going to be honest with you, okay? I was controlled. I was abused as a child. The church said I'm going to hell. Authority kept me down, and society was trying to control me into a caste. And I finally broke that caste, and my spirit rose, and I found my voice in the world, and I put it within this book. The greatest asset I have in my life, Rick, is the darkness of my past. And the darkness of my past is within the covers of these books, and it's to inspire other people in this country that you can rise above anything, poverty, okay, oppression, anything like that, and become a great American.
I hope people will take a look at the book. It's Christmas time. It's right around the time to be buying gifts for folks. Willsee.org, the website. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. I'll just click on Michael McSorley's name. It'll take you right there. Michael, really an amazing story. Nothing but the best for you. And I guess congratulations. We'd love to have you come back again at some point in the near future and talk about this some more.
Oh, thank you, Rick.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Michael.
Talk to you soon.
All righty. Let's take a quick break. Right back. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. I'm Rick Smith. And this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1916. That was the day that 7 Australian members of the Industrial Workers of the World were sentenced to 15 years in prison for their anti-war efforts during World War I. Other IWW members were sentenced to as many as 5 and 10 years each. The IWW had led the way in protesting the use of the draft, or what was called conscription, during World War I. On August 10th, 1914, the front page of the Australian IWW newspaper, Direct Action, had declared war. For what? For the workers and their dependents? Death, starvation, poverty, and untold misery. For the capitalist class? Gold, stained with the blood of millions. Riotous luxury, banquets of jubilation over the graves of their dupes and slaves. An Australian wobbly leader, Tom Barker, had urged, "Let those who own Australia do the fighting. Put the wealthiest in the front ranks. The middle class next. Follow these with politicians, lawyers, sky pilots, and judges. Answer the declaration of war with a call for a general strike." Barker was arrested and jailed more than once for his stance on the war. In 1916, Australians had grown increasingly weary of the fighting. They voted no in a referendum on the continued use of conscription. That September 1916, the government raided IWW offices and arrested key leaders. The leaders were sentenced to long prison terms. 9 months later, the IWW was outlawed in Australia. The membership rolls were made available to employers who blacklisted anyone on the lists. Continued involvement in the IWW could result in 6 months hard labor in the work camps. This government oppression took a sharp toll on the union. But to its credit, the IWW still exists in Australia to this day.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been discussing the Cherokee Indians, their history, and their responses to the American colonists' domination over them. By the mid-1700s, the Cherokee were virtually subject to rule of the American colonists. Some attacked the colonists, some assimilated into colonial life, and others ran away. But the biggest group began a movement toward a centralized government. Their local town councils formed large regional councils. Eventually, these councils elected representatives to a national council and later transformed them into a constitutional republic. But Cherokee decrees of national sovereignty angered Southern expansionists in the 1820s, and they were overwhelmed by the American electorate in the 1830s. The Cherokee were eventually forced to move to Oklahoma in a trip so difficult that almost 1/4 of them died. This was the famous Trail of Tears in the winter of 1838-39. Join us again for today's Cherokee. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happy!
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. The Rick Smith Show.
So the Crazy Caucus is back at it, or the House Freedom Caucus. Evidently, they've met with candidates vying for open seats. John Boehner's spot is one of them. They're also setting up a political action committee to raise money so that they can get more crazy people like them elected. That should be, scary. They've set up the House Freedom Fund, and earlier this year by renaming the Little Used Leadership PAC, set up in 2013 by Representative Mark Meadows of North Carolina. Meadows said that preparations for a serious fundraising push are underway. Also, Sheldon Adelson, the big money guy, was reported to be ready to throw his support behind Marco Rubio and the hundreds of millions of dollars that would come with that. But his wife, Miriam, she's kind of been a little enamored with Ted Cruz, so she's not sure. So the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to go into a political candidate's pocket based on whether, Sheldon or his wife, flip the coin, I guess. I tell you, just scary stuff. What's also interesting is, as we speak right now in Washington, D.C., a number of the presidential candidates, in fact, all 14 of the Republican candidates are going to be in D.C. at Sheldon's Republican Jewish Coalition big shindig to give their presentations, kiss the rings. Sadly, though, Shelley not going to be there. Sheldon's, I guess, off in South Africa, blood diamonds or something. I don't know. But he's not going to be there. But hey, you got to go kiss the ring, pay homage to the chair, whatever, to get the Sheldon hundreds of millions. It's not even millions anymore. I mean, that's what's outrageous to me. Just the sheer amount of money that is just, wow. And you go back to, how is it with a straight face that the Republicans can look someone in the eye and say, no, we're not going to raise the minimum wage, but we're going to run away to a party in New York City that's going to cost millions of dollars. And we're kissing the rings of people like Adelson and the Koch brothers, and they've got hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, it's just crazy. And you know what else is crazy in my view? And we've talked about this before. One of the things where I live in Carlisle, there was a story, I think it was last winter actually, that the city was going to put dividers on all of the park benches and take the backs off of them. And you know why that is, because we don't want people sleeping on the park benches. It's so unsightly. Honestly, I'm not making this up. They wanted to take the backs off and put dividers in them for that purpose. What's interesting to me is the Department of Justice has filed a brief on this latest. If you go back and remember, in Boise, Idaho, they were one of the cities who passed a law making it basically illegal to be homeless. You can't sleep on the sidewalk or camp in a public park, or you can't do any of these things, according to Boise and a whole bunch of other cities. We've seen places throughout Florida. There are hundreds of cities across the country who have done this, who are punishing the homeless for being homeless. Well, what's going on right now is the Department of Justice is pursuing litigation that's saying, look, you can't criminalize homelessness. People need to have a place to sleep. They need to have somewhere, because it's who we are. You have to sleep. There's just no way that you can possibly not sleep during the day. So if you have nowhere to go and a city is not going to provide shelter or a place for you to be, then you can't make it illegal for someone to fall asleep. Because, you'd be amazed at how many places will not allow you to sleep in your car. I mean, I remember there were a couple of times when I was working just insane numbers of hours, and I would pull off to the side of the road and sleep in my car for a little bit because I got to make it home. And the last thing I want to do is end up in a ditch. And I can't tell you how many times a cop would come up and knock on the window and go, "What are you doing?" And I'm going, "Sleeping. What's it look like I'm doing?" Until you just woke me up. And he would say, "You move it along." This to me is, you go and you hear the people talk about being a Christian nation. This is one of those things that makes me go, anyone who says that should be smacked. Now, the Department of Justice is arguing that violates the 8th Amendment protection against cruel and unusual punishment, making these laws unconstitutional. I'm interested to see where the court comes down on this and where the ruling is, Because to me, this idea that we're criminalizing people being homeless, that we're going to arrest people for feeding people in the park, all of that insanity, just not the country I want to be in. Now, according to the federal government, they estimate that about 153,000 people in this country each and every night are unsheltered, homeless, and that means there's nowhere for them to go. And I know I've heard the arguments, well, what do we do with them? How about we help find them places to stay? Instead of putting them into the criminal justice system, instead of starting down that path of, which is much more expensive. I mean, this is the part that blows my mind. It's much more expensive to have a cop come out, give them a citation, then go hunt them down when they don't show up to court, and then throw them into jail and go through this whole process of now they're a criminal. Now they can't check off the wasn't convicted of a crime box on the job application, which they can't get now because they were arrested for sleeping in the street. It's insane. It's really nuts to me. And I got to be honest. I look at this and I go, there was a time, I think, at least I hope, where what was banging around between our ears was something close to common sense. To me, common sense is you don't want people sleeping on the sidewalk? Find somewhere for them to be. That seems sane, seems rational. And it'll be interesting to see where the court decides on this case. It's, I guess, as I understand right now, it's in the Ninth Circuit of appeals right now. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Gonna take a quick break. Right back with the news. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
There is this sort of unanimity of opinion that something has got to get done here.
Historic United Nations climate talks now underway in Paris.
Technology-driven advances are relentless. They're going to drive down costs, and they're basically going to make the cheapest thing to do the cleanest thing to do.
Governments and billionaires launch huge new investments in clean energy. Plus,
governments currently engaged in this round of climate talks will want to know that there is more than just an executive branch in our system of government.
Republicans working hard to undermine progress in any way they can.
All of that undermining and progress straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
Well, the world is in turmoil and falling apart in so many different ways, especially with ISIS. Our president is worried about global warming. What a ridiculous situation.
And no one knows ridiculous situations better than you, Mr. Trump. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's quite remarkable with so much going on in the news. It's easy to not even notice the fact that this historic climate change conference is now actually underway in Paris, as you have been waiting for and anticipating for so many months.
Oh, yeah. It's history being made in Paris right now at the Global Climate Talks. The nations of the world are now meeting in Paris for the 21st Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or COP21 for short. The goal is to complete a comprehensive international binding agreement for all nations to cut the greenhouse gas emissions that cause dangerous global warming in order to keep the planet's temperature from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial times.
Yeah, good luck with that.
I know. It's about 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Human activity has already raised temperatures by 1 degree Celsius. So, by the way, we are halfway there.
Just to clarify, halfway to the bad thing, not halfway to the good thing.
That's right. U.S. President Barack Obama opened the UN climate conference with an acknowledgement that developed countries like the U.S. bear responsibility to take action.
There is such a thing as being too late. And when it comes to climate change, that hour is almost upon us. I've come here personally as the leader of the world's largest economy and the second largest emitter, to say that the United States of America not only recognizes our role in creating this problem, we embrace our responsibility to do something about it.
A successful global agreement includes transparent mechanisms for all countries to review their progress and ratchet up their targets as new technology becomes available. It includes measures to reduce deforestation and the biggest area of conflict, funding for developing nations so that they can prepare for climate change impacts and hopefully leapfrog over the pollution phase of development while still lifting their people out of poverty. And most importantly,
that it is an ambitious target that seeks a low carbon global economy over the course of this century.
in other words, phasing out fossil fuels completely. One thing the Paris conference will not do is solve climate change. National pledges to reduce emissions so far are not enough to stay below the key threshold of 2 degrees Celsius. So this is only the beginning. The talks create the architecture, the framework for the decades-long transition to a low-carbon and eventually zero-carbon economy. This is the first time all nations have agreed to do so. President Obama concluded his participation in Paris with a hopeful message.
I'm optimistic. I think we're going to solve it. I think the issue is just going to be the pace and how much damage is done before we are able to fully apply the brakes.
And so far, several major new financing programs have already been launched. The White House announced 2 sweeping initiatives. The U.S. and 20 developed nations will increase investment in clean energy research and development. A separate initiative headed by Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates will mobilize $20 billion in private venture capital investment. And India announced a new global solar energy partnership with 121 developing countries. But here in the U.S., congressional Republicans still trying to undermine President Obama in Paris.
No.
This week passing 2 new resolutions to overturn Obama's landmark new emission standards for power plants, even though the White House will veto the legislation. They said it's to send a message to the world community that the U.S. might not abide by any agreement.
And to send a message that they don't like this planet really at all. They have no interest in keeping it livable, apparently.
Yet the Republicans are out of step with Americans. A new New York Times CBS poll this week finds 2/3 of Americans want the U.S. to sign on to the UN agreement.
For much more on the stories we covered today, including COP21, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Let's find out what's going on all around the world. I got Luke Vargas. He is the UN head chief radio guy over there, UN bureau chief for Talk Radio News Service. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, glad to be back on.
So I guess you're traveling abroad all over the world, back in New York, huh?
I have been traveling a bunch, but I'm here for the time being, and probably through the new year. I'm looking at trips for next year. We've also got this big election coming up, and I know I'm going to be pressed into service on that. And I do press myself into voluntary service doing primary coverage in New Hampshire. So it's going to be kind of hard to avoid that as we start to get close to early February. But yep, New York for the time being, and in New Hampshire in a few weeks.
No, good for you. I mean, you're one of those guys, got one of those great gigs traveling all over the world. So let's find out what's going on. There's some retaliation for downing a Russian jet. What's going on?
It's the kind of funny thing that Russia has been doing recently, which is whether it's doing counter sanctions on the European Union over those sanctions on Russia, which end up just hurting Russia and Russian consumers in the long run most of the time. You know, they can't eat anything but fake Russian cheese now in Russia because they are blocking all imports of food from Europe. They seem to be doing something sort of similar with Turkey here, where they're sanctioning Turkish food imports, and I don't think, dates or anything like that are really going to make the Russian consumer base too unhappy. But the Russian energy sector is actually going to feel the biggest financial pinch because of this, not the Turks themselves. We're hearing that Russia is going to scrap this project, which they've called Turkish Stream. It was an underwater pipeline project that was going to go under the Black Sea. It was actually aimed originally to bypass Ukraine so they could get their oil exports to Europe without giving Ukraine any taste of it. This project has now been put on hold, and Gazprom, not Turkey, is suffering the most. The state-run oil company had spent, get this, $14 billion
wow.
in the last few years trying to build this, and apparently all of the pipes that they built for this project were specifically built for conditions in the Black Sea. So their officials, sort of anonymously speaking to the press here, are saying they're extra screwed because they can't repurpose any of this hardware to, put into other pipelines. So again, the Turks, I guess, are a little bit worried here. You've seen their foreign minister and president shopping around the last few days, going to Qatar, going to Azerbaijan, looking to just get assurances that, let's say, Russia closes down all of its energy trade with Turkey, that the country is going to be able to make it through the winter. But again, sort of interesting to see the punishment that Russia likes to use often backfires, and this seems to be a good case of that.
Now, that seems just kind of dumb. Especially going back to the cheese thing, I'm thinking freedom cheese.
It's been sort of funny. I was traveling from London to Moscow earlier this year for that sort of propaganda parade, and I noticed right next to the Aeroflot gates at Heathrow Airport that take people to Moscow, there was a fromagerie, and it was packed with Russians who were buying charcuterie and other sorts of fancy French cheeses to take back because you can't buy them in any of the Russian supermarkets. And then a few months ago, I saw a Forbes article that said the Russian Customs Ministry has been checking people as they get off the planes and going through their bags because they've been finding that one shop was responsible for, hundreds of incidents of people illegally smuggling in these prohibited food items. So again, sort of funny that the government wants to do these things to send a big political message, but the Russian people themselves really want these things and are very unhappy that they're prohibited from buying them. So again, what's best for the Kremlin's political purposes is not really what the people of that country want all the time.
Wow, just nuts. Let's move on to Syria. I understand that the British Parliament has okayed some airstrikes there.
They have. I'm sure a number of your listeners watched some of the really impassioned speeches in the House of Commons yesterday, including from Hilary Benn, the shadow foreign secretary on the Labour minority, who gave a very passionate speech against any sort of intervention in Syria. Well, that wasn't enough to actually switch the vote here. It was not as close as people thought. Almost 400 votes in the parliament in favor of military action. Quite a big reversal. You remember back in 2013, President Obama was trying to get together a coalition to actually attack Assad and the Syrian army. And things really fell apart because did not want to go.
I guess we just lost.
Conservatives in Westminster decided they wanted to go along with that. Maybe that would have changed the minds of folks in the U.S. Congress, but that coalition fell apart very quickly. We've seen a big switch, and overnight, just hours after that vote, the British Air Force started attacking oil fields in eastern Syria. I don't think it's going to have a big impact. They're not doing anything we can't do or don't want to do. But I guess it reflects well on U.S. efforts to try to get a few countries together now. But again, these European militaries really can't contribute all that much.
Interesting to see where that goes. Also, I understand that the German government is apologizing to Saudi Arabia. Why?
Sort of funny here. The BND, sort of like the German CIA, published a memo yesterday and circulated it to the foreign and German press, in which they gave a pretty candid and damning assessment of Saudi Arabian foreign policy, saying a lot of things I think we maybe think back here in the U.S., but our political leaders can't say, essentially saying this country is taking a big gamble. It's sort of moving out of its long-term sort of isolationist, cautious foreign policy and driven essentially by the new king's ego and desire to try to flex the country's muscles in their rivalry with Iran, is pursuing a very reckless, impulsive interventionist strategy. They called out the ongoing Saudi military action in Yemen as an example of this. And this really broke the decorum. I mean, anyone that has been partnered with Saudi Arabia through the years, including the United States, and it's, even sort of talked about in pop culture, like in The West Wing, where they have all these, people in the administration who want to come out and criticize Saudi Arabian human rights or other things, but because of intelligence and defense partnerships, you can't really do that. Well, here's a great example of a long-term ally of the Saudis having one wing of the government sort of speak its mind. And you saw the foreign minister today come out, condemn his own intelligence agencies, so that doesn't speak for the government's position, sort of an untenable argument, but one you've got to make to try and save face. But kind of funny, a little letting the cat out of the bag there.
Yeah, I mean, but you're talking truth. I do believe that they are destabilizing the Middle East.
I think it's a pretty widely shared view. But again, it's interesting. We're seeing at present the United States and other countries who want to expand this military coalition in Syria, they're looking to other countries to try and pony up ground forces. And we had Qatar earlier this week, or I take that back. The United Arab Emirates foreign minister said on Monday that that country would be willing to offer some ground troops in the Syria campaign. This would seem like good news. It's a country we haven't had contribute troops to any of our campaigns in the past. Good news, right? Well, not quite. A lot of these, I'm going to call them B-list Arab states when it comes down to their contributions or potential contributions. So the Emirates don't have a huge army. They haven't traditionally worked with us. They may say things like that, but then they turn around and make these claims saying we're doing this because the imperialist Western military coalitions can never succeed. And they're sort of dissing the coalition at the same time as trying to support it. The Saudis don't do that. They're much more reserved, just as the U.S. is quite reserved in the way we talk about the Saudis. But when you start to move beyond Saudi Arabia and Egypt, who sort of are similar in the way they act, you start dealing with the Qatars, the Emiratis, and the Omanis, and you just don't have the same long-term relationships. And so you're going to get a lot more of that candid talk and a lot more, sort of shots fired, rhetorically speaking, at the U.S. in exchange for military cooperation. So if this is what we want, if we want to be pressuring these Gulf kingdoms to help us out militarily, we're going to just have to prepare ourselves for the fact that they don't always talk quite as nicely to us.
Right.
But again, it's much more of a surprise to see this sort of spat with the Saudis, because most people are in these governments are on the same page.
No, I mean, how many troops are they talking about sending? 2? I mean,
we don't know. We don't know, actually. They didn't specify that, and I think that's pretty telling. They're waiting for someone else to make the first move, but trying to score some political points by saying that they're open and that they've got enough military force to be able to make a contribution, but very scant on details there, and that's important.
All right, what's going on in France? I understand that they're attempting to renew the state of emergency. Why?
Well, they really like this state of emergency because it's given the French police and security forces broad leeway to make sort of preemptive arrests of people they think might be connected to terrorism. One of the big problems has actually been with these climate talks. There are a lot of reports of a number of climate activists essentially being rounded up before those Paris climate talks began earlier this week, held without having any explanation of the charges made against them. The government seems to like this. They're banning demonstrations.
How
it's
convenient.
made their job of organizing these talks a little bit easier, but what seemed like a very easy move to renew this state of emergency ban and actually pass constitutional reforms allowing them to stay in place for much longer in future cases, we're now seeing pushback from French civil society. And I think the arrest of the climate activists are responsible for a lot of that. People saying this is just way too heavy-handed. But the debate looks like it's going to come up on the 23rd of December, so a little pre-Christmas French civil society showdown going down in Parliament. And I think it's going to be a lot closer fight for these reforms than people might have thought in the wake of those Paris attacks.
Interesting. Also, I understand Ben Carson made his way to Jordan. Is that true?
He did. He spent a pair of hours in 2 different refugee camps there, I guess trying to get a good photo op and show that he at least cares a little bit about foreign policy. He's been pretty flat-footed on the subject so far, really not saying anything enlightening at all about foreign policy. And I think he didn't really learn very much from this trip. He came back, he wrote an op-ed in the Hill, the DC newspaper, and then went on the Today Show and did an interview about what he now thinks about refugee policy. And in the op-ed, where he could sort of maybe get some help behind the scenes and have someone clever things, he made a lot of sense. He was criticizing some of the camps that he saw there. I spent about 10 days at these camps and know very well what their problems are. He said, look, these are places where there's no economic opportunity. People are stuck. They don't have electricity. They're all sharing toilets. I mean, no one wants to be able to be in these places where you can't work. You can't travel easily to see other people. And then on the Today Show, he really changed his tune, not a surprise for someone who's pretty weak on foreign policy. He said, this is the model, these Jordanian camps, for how refugees should be treated. We shouldn't bring them to the United States because, unlike in other countries where people understand their cultural priorities, in the U.S., they're not going to assimilate. They're going to stick with each other, which evidence does not suggest to be the case. And they're going to be radicalized. This is such a great, hilarious argument that they're actually going to be radicalized in the United States by American resentment of them, that it's everyone trash-talking the refugees that's going to make them become terrorists. Well, it doesn't help when Ben Carson compares them to rabid dogs in his own speeches. So I'm not sure what he's talking about here. He seems to be part of the problem that he's using justify not bringing them into this country. So I think he's all over the place. He didn't seem to learn very much from this. And if you really think these desert camps, hundreds of miles from any economic opportunity, are the way that you can solve the refugee problem worldwide, it's very naive and not surprising, really, given what we've seen from his candidacy so far.
And let's look at the rest of the field, though. I mean, he's evidently he's falling. Trump's still rising, which is kind of shocking to me.
Yeah, I mean, I just saw some new polling numbers out of New Hampshire today, which I've been watching pretty closely and anticipating over the last few weeks, because the polls that we had seen up until today hadn't been after the Paris terrorist attack. So we were sort of expecting a few things. We were expecting Chris Christie to get a bump because he has been really capitalizing on the fact that he was, a prosecutor, that he is tough on terror and likes all these government surveillance programs. Well, not surprisingly, he got a big boost. He's got 10% in New Hampshire now, has some signs of life, though I still think he's got some big challenges, getting the love of the Republican electorate. Trump holding steady, actually sort of up from the last survey. Carson taking a little bit of a drop. And the big one that I was watching very carefully today, and I know he's been sort of a small fish in this whole election, but was Lindsey Graham. When I was last up in New Hampshire, I don't think we actually recorded a hit that day, but I did give you a ring. He was doing 10 campaign events alongside John McCain. And those two senators have been basically the only ones in the Senate, and Lindsey Graham has been the only Republican candidate arguing for American ground troops in Syria. And it was sort of, I still don't think that's a popular position, even after the Paris terrorist attacks. But you might have thought that if there was ever a time for Lindsey Graham to get some love, it would be taking that message to a state where terrorism is a top priority. Well, I think we can safely kiss this guy's campaign goodbye, because he registered 0% in the last poll. And this was completely after the Paris terrorist attacks. Actually, the survey was over the last 4 days. He's polling behind Rick Santorum, behind Mike Huckabee, behind George Pataki, someone we haven't heard about in months. I think that's the last thing for Lindsey Graham. You can't have John McCain hitting the stump for you, taking 3-4 days out of his schedule in Washington, and then not have anything to show for it as far as public opinion polls. So that might be the biggest takeaway from this poll. But also interesting to see Christie starting to edge up, and Bush at 5%, the lowest he's ever been in New Hampshire. So a real long uphill battle for him too, if he wants to have any shot of finally winning a state or staying alive at all.
Wow. So then I'm guessing Lindsey's tracking worse than Vermin Love Supreme then. Remember him?
I love Vermin Supreme. I've photographed that guy over the last 2 election cycles. In one event, it was and to your listeners, this is a New Hampshire resident who runs basically every presidential cycle, and he has been, I think, for about 20 years now. He's got a really nice long ratty beard and puts a rubber boot on his head. Yep. And it's like a 3-foot rubber boot. And he sort of crashes all these different events. I went to a candidate forum with him 4 years ago, And I guess another guy running for president that no one knew of was very much opposed to abortion, and was basically talking about that the whole time. And Berman Supreme, during they were all sitting around a table, and he went up behind the guy and just dumped a bunch of glitter on his head and started making a scene for the cameras. But he's entertaining, and I would, it stands to reason, looking at these poll numbers, that him and Lindsey Graham are about neck and neck right now.
It is what it is. Anyway, Luke, I appreciate you taking time, taking us around the world. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Great talking with you. Luke Vargas, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
The word free in free enterprise is not an adjective, it's a verb. As in, let's free up the enterprise of small business people who are locked out of the marketplace by monopoly power. From cable TV to chickens, market after market has been seized by a few corporations, enabling them to set prices, cut quality, and shrink service. We could cry in our beer about that, but even brewskis are falling to monopolists. The latest and biggest example is the proposed merger of Anheuser-Busch InBev with SAB Miller, creating a colossus that would control a third of all beer sales in the world and a whopping 70% of all U.S. sales. Yet the resulting AB InBev behemoth asserts that there will be no antitrust problems because hundreds of small breweries are popping up like dandelions everywhere, creating a wide-open competition for customers. How free enterprisey and fallacious. You see, to get customers, first you have to be able to get to them, i.e. be able to get your beers in the bars and on store shelves. That access is mostly controlled in the U.S. by beer wholesalers, and they decide which products they will and will not distribute. Now, guess which big honking beer maker has been aggressively buying up wholesale distributorships in recent years? Yes, AB InBev, giving it the power in various markets to lock out those pesky small breweries. No shelf space, no sales. No sales, no business. This is Jim Hightower saying Anheuser-Busch InBev gloats that it will be the, quote, first truly global brewery. But who cares? We quaffers of the brewer's art don't want one big beer, but many good ones. And this bully is becoming global only by rigging the market to shut down our good beers. To revolt against this monopolizer, contact California Craft Brewers Association at californiacraftbeer.com.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
So Elizabeth Warren, along with Dick Durbin and Richard Blumenthal, they sent a letter to the U.S. Department of Education saying, look, what you've done with Education Management Corporation, EDMC, and you may remember we talked about this about a month ago, I think it was, where Eric Schneiderman and a number of the attorneys generals across the country settled with this for-profit education company, this EDMC. They own the Art Institutes. They own Argosy University, South University, Brown Mackie College. A lot of these places, not up there on your best college lists, but they do a great job of selling you on, hey, it's easy, just give us a boatload of cash. Well, the attorneys generals, they went and settled with these for-profit colleges because of their predatory practices. $102 million. The Department of Justice also settled $95.5 million. So you're looking at almost $200 million in settlements for bilking billions out of students. And that's really what this has been. They've been bilking billions out of not just students, but out of the federal government as well. And Elizabeth Warren, Durbin, and Blumenthal are all saying, look, you gotta do something. This ain't doing it. You've got to go after them. In fact, they wrote, we're profoundly dissatisfied with a settlement in which the government recovered a minuscule fraction of stolen taxpayer funds, held no one accountable, no individuals accountable, while failing to even obtain an admission of wrongdoing. And, this is one of those reasons why I like Elizabeth Warren. Would have been nice to see her run for president, but was. Anyway, appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. If you missed any parts of the part of the show, ricksmithshow.com. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's color like the tide of flood beneath the Luna sway. Imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.
We see the storm out on the horizon. The clouds grow dark in the midnight sky. We feel the fire burning in the belly, the